Welcome to The Sleep Haunt. Tonight, the long road winds through the dark, carrying 8 true disturbing trucker horror stories, tales born from empty highways, silent gas stations, and long nights where the air feels heavier than the sky. These stories move slow, steady, and quiet, but their echoes travel far beyond the headlights. Stay with me until the final mile, where each story meets the next and the last whisper fades into stillness. If you're new, subscribe to our channel so you never miss what waits beyond the road. Share your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And like our video, your like motivates us to keep bringing you more nights on the road. Story number 1. Mason had driven long enough to know when the road was keeping secrets. That night, the interstate ran through a basin of fog that held sound, the way a glacier held ancient air tight, compressed, waiting. The truck's headlights tunneled in a narrow cone, capturing a floating pinprick world of moisture and dust. Everything beyond felt muted, like the scenery had been put on pause. The world had a way of doing that after midnight on a Tuesday, but the fog added its own hush. A flannel blanket laid over the landscape. Signs drifted out of the whiteness, low contrast and soft at the edges. Next rest area, 1 mile. He had been waiting for it, watching the minutes on his ELD tick toward the end of his legal driving window. It would be an easy stop. Pull through, park nose, out, tuck into the sleeper, and let the cool air soak the heat from his shoulders. The platform of the dash hummed with small electronics, GPS, ELD, an old CB whose mic cord curled like a sleeping snake. The CB stayed quiet, as if it had agreed with the fog to keep its counsel. He eased off the throttle and let the truck glide into the deceleration lane. An amber hazard light winked up ahead, slow and patient. A white maintenance pickup idled next to the entrance lane, cone lamps glowing like little captured moons. A figure in a reflective vest stood with a folded sign in his hands, the kind of temporary announcement used for a quick evening fix. The man nodded as Mason rolled past, a brief acknowledgement between two people awake when most people slept. The nod was comforting in a way ordinary, forgotten the same minute it happened. The rest area itself had the careful tidiness of a place that expected inspection. Trash cans empty. Lawn cut close enough to see the sprinkler heads. Vending machines lit and humming behind thick glass, their blue-white light spilling across tile like a small, shallow lake. He parked alongside a tree island, where a wind-shaped pine leaned over the pull-throughs, as if it wanted to hear the passing stories. He set the brake and let the engine idle for a moment, then shut it down and listened to the silence that followed. It came like a held breath released. Something tapped the trailer. A light sound, not insistent. It could have been a palm frond on the other side of the state. It could have been the pine saying hello. In the fog, distances lied. He waited, eyes on the mirror. Another tap, then nothing. He slid his hat down and stretched back, letting the sickle-shaped arc of the interior light glow over the dashboard. The digital clock flashed 12, 0 inches, that stubborn way clocks do when they're fresh from a power outage. He frowned, because it had shown 12:47 moments ago. He pressed the buttons, set it again, closed his eyes. Sleep was close, the kind of sleep that has weight, the kind that promises to stay. But the tapping returned, a slow, polite request. He wasn't nervous, exactly, just alert, like listening to rain to see if it would turn to hail. He climbed down from the cab, and the fog met him like a quiet host. The air smelled faintly of cool water and clay. Up close, the trailer's skin carried 1,000 pale dots of condensation, the kind of surface rain that never quite decided to fall. He circled it with a small flashlight, beam tucked tight to not wake anyone else parked nearby. But no other rigs idled. He was alone. The maintenance pickup's amber lamps thudded softly across the fog like slow heartbeat pulses. Between the flashes, darkness settled with a softness that fooled the eye. The vending machines hummed. Somewhere in the trees, a bird made a single sleep noise, like someone testing a note and then deciding to wait until morning. On the pavement near the rear axles lay a maple leaf plastered flat, shining like a pressed coin in a shallow fountain. He reached for it, then drew his hand back without knowing why. The leaf wasn't the source of the tapping. Nothing was. Back in the cab, he eased the door closed so it wouldn't slam, slid into the sleeper, and let the day sigh out of his bones. The clock read 12:02, then 12:03. He watched it cross the minute and convinced himself the earlier reset had been a trick of the eye. He set an alarm, rolled to his side and surrendered. When he woke, the truck wore a new quiet. The kind that comes just before dawn, when the world is pale and colorless and even the birds wait to speak. He turned the key to accessory and glanced at the clock. 12. Null again. Blinking. He checked his phone. 3:19 a.m. The difference sent a small, cold ripple through his chest. He shrugged it off. Weather did strange things with signals. He started the engine and eased out of the slot, tires whispering on wet pavement. Back on the interstate, the fog thickened like a curtain closing. The same muted world, the same soft-edged signs. He passed a mile marker and felt, irrationally, that it recognized him. Then a familiar green panel rose from the white. Next rest area, 1 mile. He almost laughed. A moment of déjà vu in a night full of them. He told himself it was another rest area, symmetrical layout, same vendor contract for the machines. Roads repeated themselves. That's what roads did. He rolled into the deceleration lane and saw the amber hazard light ahead, a white maintenance pickup blinking its calm pulse. The figure in the reflective vest raised the folded sign in the same casual way, nodding in the same slow motion. Mason lifted his palm in a polite half-wave. He'd been on the road too long, that was all. He parked again in a line of empty spaces, this time choosing a bay closer to the vending machines for the sake of variety. His clock blinked insistently. 12. He said it. He stood inside the cab, hand on the door handle, the cab light pooling over the rubber floor mat. He reached down to the step and set his paper coffee cup under the edge, an odd little test. If the cup were there later, then something was funny with him, not the world. If it weren't, then he'd simply made a circle and come back like a dog, retracing its morning route. The test felt childish and precise at once. He stepped out and stretched, the fog sliding around his shoulders. The tapping came again, polite as a neighbor's knock. He rounded the trailer slowly. Nothing waited there but the leaf pressed to the pavement and the soft, broad breath of the fog moving. Suddenly, the amber lights of the maintenance truck went dark, a quiet that filled the rest area. Mason glanced up. The reflective vested figure stood motionless, sign tucked under his arm, the vest a dim shape in the grayness. The man raised a hand and made a small motion like a traffic cop in slow motion, the universal sign for keep moving. Mason lifted both palms in a friendly okay, stepped back into the cab, and kept the engine running. He sat with the heater low. The fog felt like a listener. He thought of calling dispatch, then pictured trying to explain the feeling how everything seemed to wait for him to act first, as if the world around him were a partner in a dance he didn't know. The CB crackled slightly and then silenced itself. He checked the mic cord, twisted it gently, and watched the display, but no channel numbers rolled. Another small tapping moved across the trailer wall, traveled from back to front, and stopped near the cab. A polite pause, then retreated. His alarm chimed. He frowned. It hadn't been set for any exact time because the clock had reset. He picked up his phone. 3:19 a.m. again. Not 3:23:19. Exactly. The phone's face glowed with quiet assurance, like a friend's hand on his shoulder. He set the device on the dash and laughed once, a low sound of disbelief. The fog pressed closer, as if to hear. He pulled out, eased, back onto the interstate, and knew he was doing something foolish even as he did it. The fog swallowed the merge, and the white lines ran like narrow rails through whiteness. Minutes later, a sign bloomed into view. Next rest area, 1 mile. The laugh he'd held back earlier escaped him, softer this time. This was a trick of the land. A highway running alongside its own twin for a few miles with a duplicate facility. He told himself so because not telling himself so would mean letting the night change shape around him. He took the ramp. The amber light blinked. The white maintenance pickup idled. The reflective vest nodded with the same slow yes. He glided in, and a feeling like warm memory rose in his chest, almost comfort. He scanned the spaces as he coasted. Near the same island of pine, under the step of the same spot he'd chosen first, lay a paper coffee cup. He braked a little too sharply. The truck gave a soft complaint. He stared at the cup until the edges of it blurred. Then he parked somewhere else out of sheer stubbornness, like choosing a different chair in a familiar room to prove to himself the room couldn't tell him where to sit. He sat still. The tap came, the polite knuckle. 2 beats, a breath, 2 beats. He whispered a soundless, "Okay," and listened to his own breath come back to him. This time, he climbed down with caution more than curiosity. The fog rolled deeper. The maintenance truck switched its amber light off again, and the world rested without the pulse. From the corner of his eye, something near the vending machines moved. The reflective vested figure had taken a few steps, the folded sign tucked under his arm like a thin suitcase. The man raised both hands and made a different gesture now, 2 open palms held forward. The universal "keep your distance." He pointed to the truck, then to the interstate ramp, then slowly, deliberately, to the sky, which at this hour wasn't much of a sky at all, more like a ceiling. Mason nodded, though he wasn't sure what he had agreed to. He backed toward his cab without turning his back, the way people do when they want to be polite and prepared at the same time. The tapping followed him for 3 steps, stopped, then tapped once more as he climbed into the seat, a quick rhythm that felt like gratitude, not malice. He left the rest area without looking back. The white lines pulled him forward. The fog thinned in places, then thickened again. His phone held steady at 3:19. He tried to trick it by switching airplane mode on and off. The time did not budge. The GPS line on his dash began to flicker, lost fix, then found it, then lost it again. In the rearview mirrors, the trailer's corners floated like lit edges of a box in a white room. He passed the sign again, because of course he did. Next rest area 1 mile. He stayed in the right lane and kept going. The shoulder posts flicked by like quiet metronomes. A low embankment rose and fell. He began to hum under his breath, a simple tune to prove he wasn't listening to anything but himself. The humming didn't help. He felt an idea taking shape in the back of his mind, the kind that arrives without knocking. This wasn't a circle on a map. It was a circle on a clock. He pushed on. The sign held its distance for a time that felt like a long breath. Then the entrance lane appeared anyway, and with it the amber light. The maintenance pickup sat quiet with the hazard off. The reflective vest was gone. The vending machines were dark. The rest area lay in a deeper shade of gray, like a photograph of itself. He drove past without exiting. Fingers tight on the wheel, eyes forward. A faint sound came from the sleeper, as if an index finger had drawn across a plastic surface. He glanced at the right mirror. One of his reflective triangles, stored behind the passenger seat, had slipped and now leaned at an angle. He took the next mile marker slower, then slower still, then drifted into the emergency pull-off and set the brake. He sat with his hands on the wheel for a count of 10. His breath fogged the lower corner of the window and cleared. He opened the door, took 1 step onto the gravel, and paused. The fog held steady, patient. He walked to the back of the cab and lifted the sleeper curtain. One of the triangles had indeed tipped. He secured it. The other 2 stood upright, orange and red catching any light they could find. He closed the curtain and stood still. A quiet came then, smooth and large. And with it a thought he hadn't allowed. Maybe he wasn't the only one who wanted him to keep moving. When he resumed, he didn't look for the sign. He drove until the world decided to soften. The fog thinned not by degrees but by mood, as if it had made a decision. The first bird call came, tentative, then a second agreed. The horizon found color in itself. The ELD chirped a warning he'd expected hours earlier. His phone finally shrugged and rolled to 320, because morning had finally granted permission. He pulled into a fuel stop where the air smelled like coffee and wet gravel. The fluorescent lights flickered with normal imperfection. A man at the next pump nodded the way drivers do when their paths cross for a minute and never again. Mason went inside for a cup, and the comfort of the human voices that come with a cash register and a waffle iron. At the counter, curiosity tugged. Fog was thick, he said, placing the lid on the cup. That rest area up the road still open? The cashier looked up. You mean Prairie Creek? Closed at night. Maintenance been out there. They put up signs early in the evening and take them down at first light. If you saw it open, you didn't. He smiled because it was easier. Saw a truck there, figured they were fixing something. They've had trouble with the signs, the cashier said, as if that explained everything. In weather like this, Radios get funny. You get any weird static out there? Quiet as a church, Mason said. He took his change and turned. Thanks. On the way back to his rig, he noticed something on the rear step where he kept a bungee cord hooked when he needed it. A leaf. Plastered like a small bronze. He brushed at it and found it fixed with only water's stubbornness. He left it there and climbed up. In the cab, he took the paper cup from the dash and realized he'd never retrieved the other one. He stared at the new cup's seam, followed its line around to the mouth he'd not yet touched, and let the thought pass unspoken. Later, he would review his dashcam footage, more out of habit than hope. Night scenes often turn to static and light noise from water on the lens, but in the footage, the rest area appeared like a stage set lit only at the edges. He watched himself circle the trailer, the cone of his flashlight moving across aluminum. Behind him, near the rear doors, a shape stood very still. Not a person. Exactly. A posture. The suggestion of a pair of shoulders and the outline of a head where the fog had thickened into something that wanted to be seen without being seen. The camera wasn't brave enough to sharpen it. The tapping aligned with his own footfalls in a way that made sense only in the moment at each pause of his steps. The tap came as if to say, "Keep going." He closed the laptop softly, as though the quiet in the footage could spill out. The next time he ran that route, clear sky opened overhead, like a window the size of the state. The rest area shone with ordinary day, cars parked under the pine, a child tugging his parent toward the vending machines. No maintenance truck, no amber pulse. The leaf had long since blown away. He did not stop. But sometimes, drifting toward sleep in the sleeper berth on other nights, when rain crawled down the windows and the world went the color of tin, he would hear a soft rhythm somewhere between the engine's tick and the whisper of air through vents. 2 beats, a pause, 2 beats. He would smile in the dark and keep breathing with it, letting the miles fold behind him like fog falling back into the trees. Nothing bad had happened. Nothing had even tried to. But the polite persistence of that gentle request followed him like a road sign that moved to wherever he was. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Story number 2. Lila liked the road the way other people liked a good blanket. For the weight of it, the way it pressed out the day's noise. Her refrigerated trailer murmured with a steady chill that made its own weather in. The cab, a soft, mechanical lullaby. She had a run of high-value electronics from a warehouse in Kansas City to a distribution center outside Denver, an overnight glide that would keep her in the pocket of darkness and tuck her into a dawn delivery with a signature and a smile. The prairie opened around her like a slow breath. Stars sat low and uncomplicated, the kind that showed themselves when the wind forgot to bother the clouds. The interstate signs had that late-hour sheen, letters floating on the retro-reflective film as if someone had etched them into the night itself. Her ELD counted quietly down in the corner of the dash, a metronome only she could hear. Channel 19 dozed. A truck in the far lane drifted by with its marker lights beating in a tidy line, then rolled on into its own emptiness. It was the kind of night built for making distance. Ahead, an amber message board woke up with a patient blink. Road work. Ahead. Expect delays. Detour at MM 214. She checked the odometer and the green tick marks on her map app. The app was confident. The message board was confident. Confidence all around. She took a sip of coffee and let the reefer hum count the seconds with her. At mile marker 214, the world narrowed into cones and flashing arrow boards. A pair of flaggers in reflective pants moved like clock hands, turning traffic off the interstate onto a state highway marked with a temporary sign. The black arrow pointed into a right-hand curve that wound down through cottonwoods toward a town she didn't know by name. It was ordinary in the way late-night detours were ordinary. Reflective vests, orange plastic, a smell like hot paint, a worker's hand lifted in a wear-your-seatbelt arc. Lila followed a pair of red taillights into the curve and let the main line fall away behind her. The state highway felt older under her tires. The center line was paint, not tape. Sun faded into a shade that had to remind the headlights of what yellow should be. The first detour sign stood like a patient usher at the corner, high on a thin U-channel post. Detour with a block arrow printed by someone whose stencil didn't quite fit. The edges of the letters splayed in a subtle feather, Hand-me-down signage, she thought. It happened. Her GPS tried to be helpful and then admitted it didn't know where she was. Off-route, it declared in a polite tone. Continue to the marked route. The ELD just blinked and kept time. Her reefer held its cold. Lila leaned forward to see past her own hood ornament. Another orange sign waited at the next turn with the same blocky lettering, the same not quite DOT shape to the arrowhead. She stayed with it because that's what the job asked. Follow the detour. Trust the people who had been there long enough to set cones while the world still had heat in it. The town was already asleep. A diner sat with its neon PIE sign lit, but no cars nosed under its light. A mural of a covered wagon faded across a brick wall. The shadows were easy on the eyes, none of them too thick. The detour signs threaded her through 3 turns, then laid her out on a 2-lane that ran straight between late-season corn and a line of telephone poles, the wires scalloping off into the dark, with the same lazy arc over and over. A wind from the west ruffled the tassels. Somewhere, a pivot irrigation system clicked, clicks caught, and muted by distance. She kept a CB ear open and spoke once. The way people toss a pebble into a pond to listen for the depth. Any of you caught the detour up at 2:14? Quiet. A minute later, a voice with a Missouri dip replied, "Negative driver. Must be night shift got you. We came through earlier, smooth sailing." And then nothing more. Like the voice had rolled past her and couldn't be bothered to lean out the window. The taillights she'd been following had drawn far enough ahead that they became an idea more than a set of lights. 2 dots drifting with purpose, never widening, never shrinking. It was comforting in an animal way to have a lead to hold on to. She settled into their rhythm and let her speed ride a notch below theirs, leaving the right kind of space for human error and sudden thoughts. When the road curved, the detour arrow kept pace, always there just where the decision point lived. They were shy about making promises, those little signs, short words printed large so there'd be no misunderstanding. 2 miles, 4 miles. A small square of white just below the second arrow had a black truck silhouette surrounded by that same blocky lettering. Trucks okay. Good. Bridges were always the worry. Her phone buzzed on the dash with an incoming text from dispatch. Heads up, rolling lane closure extends to 220 now. Expect slow near the river. K. A little late, but fine. She thumbed back a single K at the next safe drift. Dispatch would interpret that as steady hands. They always did. The sound changed. The way sound changes when you approach water at night. It wasn't louder, it was wider. The air felt like it had unrolled a sheet over itself. Lila checked the outside temp and watched it drop 1 degree. Her headlights caught a low mist in the fields. Nothing dramatic, just the kind that brushed the lower half of fence posts and made the grass glow with a soft, frost-colored glamour. She breathed and tasted a mineral cool she could have named in a different life. They passed a sign for a county park that claimed a boat ramp and a picnic shelter for rent. The little icon of a fish jumping over a line had an old-fashioned grin. The next detour sign wore a different face. Same orange, same black arrow, but the corners had rounded themselves into an earlier decade's idea of modern. The bolts holding the sign to its post were not the square-neck carriage bolts she expected. They looked like slotted screws from a hardware store that had also sold nails by the pound. She told herself what drivers tell themselves at moments like that. The state was raiding the back of the barn to keep traffic moving, while the main road got patched. It made sense. The mind sensed the way the hands like warmth. Ahead, the twin red dots topped a slight rise and then dropped, then topped another, then another, as if the land had been made by a careful hand that had pressed 3 knuckles into a tabletop. Lila counted them without meaning to. On the 4th, the dots didn't drop. They hung at exactly the same height for a little too long. "You seeing that?" she said aloud to no one, and realized she'd asked the reefer. The GPS had stopped trying to help. The black ribbon that was supposed to show her road had gone to a kind of gray suggestion, as if the app had drawn it from memory, and memory had gotten bored. No speed limit showed, no street name, just a blank space with a blue arrow for her and nothing else. The next detour arrow was canted a degree sideways, turned by a wind that couldn't be felt. The sign had a small crease at the top where someone had bent it, and then bent it back. Below the arrow, someone had added with a stencil smaller letters. Use. Old Y77. Lila blinked. Her map app, when it had cared, had only listed a county road number. She hadn't seen any mention of 77 on her atlas recently either. Old highways were like bones. Some showed through, some didn't. She passed a gas station that still had a slot for a payphone outside, the glass booth cleaned by weather and the hand of nobody. A cat sat on the concrete with its tail wrapped around both front paws and watched her go by with an intention she'd only ever seen in humans. The cat didn't blink. Neither did she. The taillights ahead performed their impossible trick again on a rise, staying at eye height instead of dropping. They pulsed once in what might have been a tap to a brake pedal, a polite check-in between driver and road. She eased off 2 miles per hour and felt her own truck's weight shift the way you feel a friend lean into a couch cushion beside you. The reefer hummed, and then paused for a second, and then caught itself, as if it had reconsidered its opinion on the proper temperature of electronics. A small white square sign with black text appeared at the road edge, half hidden by grass. Weight, limit 28,000. Below it, a sticker had been slapped with a black box around white letters. Exempt during detour. Lila wasn't overweight. She had room to spare. But the numbers felt like a smile with one tooth missing, harmless, but I noticed. She rolled through a 4-way intersection where the cross street had no detour arrow at all. On the corner sat a motel that looked like someone had folded it out of wood and glue and then rubbed the edges with sandpaper until it pretended to be a postcard. The sign over the office, a kind of angling, cursive optimism, read Shady Court in tubes of neon. Only the U flickered like a tired eyelid. Below, a buzzer button sat with a note taped above it. Night clerk at home. Please ring twice. The letters had only slightly faded. The tape only slightly yellowed. The office light was on. Somebody sat at the desk with hands folded, in that universal shape of waiting. But the face never lifted. If the bell had rung, it might not have rung at all. She didn't stop. It wasn't in her run sheet, and it wasn't in her to make it part of one. The taillights kept themselves arranged in the distance like a hallway light left on for comfort. She let them be that, because that's what humans do with dots of red when the night asks. On her right, a billboard frame stood, the plywood long ago removed or blown away, just a skeleton of what someone once hoped to sell to someone else. A second frame appeared a minute later, with the same absence. A third shadowed up after that, and when the fourth took its place, she felt it like a whisper. Okay, she said under her breath. Okay. She keyed up her CB again. 203 eastbound? Anyone else on this detour? This time a voice came quick, friendly, local. You'll want to watch that river, ma'am. Bridge is narrow. Hug your stripe. Appreciate you, she said. Nothing answered but the small hiss that always lives in radio. Somewhere behind her, the road delivered another truck. In Lila's mirrors, his lights rose and settled into place at the right distance, not in a hurry, not too relaxed. She felt better for it. The company of someone who knew how to let another person live their life without stepping on it is rare at any hour. A mile passed. 2. Then a turn with an arrow, a shade flatter than it should have been. A marker with one screw missing at the base made the sign wag with a very slow yes, no, yes. The taillights ahead paused again at the top of a rise and relit as if a foot had lifted and pressed down again. Lila's fingers flexed on the wheel. It was something a person had to do if they were leading unfamiliar vehicles through a narrow place. Tap your brakes to say, I'm changing my pace. She let the thought calm her, and then watched the red dots hold their height for one beat too long. It was like a person holding a door too wide, too long. The air smoothed out in her cab, shaking off texture. Her ears popped the way they do on a hill, though her altimeter barely moved. The road skin changed. The asphalt went to a coarse old mix with smooth patches where decades had ironed traffic into something like glass. Her headlights caught rectangular reflectors set into the center line, the kind they'd stopped using years ago. A few were cracked. A few had lifted at one corner as if the sticky belly of them had given up trying. A sign, orange and confident. Detour. Arrow right. Use. Old Y77. Trucks okay. She took it and found herself on a long, straight approach between two low fields, toward a tree line that thickened into a dark belt. The sound of the river that wasn't visible yet widened more. That sheet unrolling again. Somewhere a scent like copper and old rain found its way in through the vents. The taillights did their not dropping again, and then held still. Lila slowed. Not a lot, just enough to feel what she was on. "Driver behind me," she said into the mic. "You copy?" A moment, then a voice, as companionable as a porch. "Got you. How you want to play this?" "I don't love this," Lila said, "but if those signs want to keep me on 77, they're going to have to show me the bridge." 10-4, he said. "Ain't a bridge there since I was a kid." She blinked. "Say again?" "River took it in 87, the voice said, no drama, just a fact. New span went up north. State pulled the detour off this stretch. Locals still run it with pickups when it dries, but you ain't local." Lila looked ahead. The taillights hung, polite as door attendants. "I'm seeing arrows," she said. "Every corner." The man behind her breathed out a sound that could have been a laugh if a person were allowed to laugh alone in the dark. "I didn't see a one," he said. "Saw you turn. Figured you knew a short way." The wind that wasn't wind ran across the fields and brushed the top leaves of the corn, so they hissed in a soft chorus. The tree line at the river kept its beltline firmness, but beyond it, something opened in a way the eye recognizes and the mind won't greet. The red dots ahead flickered, and then resolved like a pair of fireflies learning a dance, then stayed. Lila let her truck slow to a walking speed, and then to the speed a person uses when they want to look at a glass of water and not spill it. "I'm going to set brakes," she said. "We're too heavy for a ghost story." "Copy," the driver behind said. "You want me to spot you back to the junction?" "If you're game," she said, and felt the immediate relief that comes when someone reaches out a hand and you don't have to pretend you don't need it. She pulled the yellow knob. The air hissed with that assertive sigh that always sounded like a world sitting down. The taillights ahead didn't react. She flicked on her hazards. The two red diamond icons began to tick-tock. The taillights didn't acknowledge. Lila climbed down, the night landing on her like a shawl. It wasn't cold. It was something like deliberate. The other driver's flashlight cut a neat path through the air as he walked up to her bumper. He was older than his voice, hair like a storm cloud, eyes reflecting light in a way that made him seem to have been designed for night shift work. Ortega was stitched on his jacket. He lifted the beam once toward the road ahead and brought it down again as if he had decided not to aim it at the thing a person shouldn't aim at. "Backed doubles out of worse," he said gently. "You single? Good. Let's ease you home." They did it like a dance called by a calm caller. He took the blind side because he trusted his ability to be seen more than hers, to see what didn't want to be seen. She watched his hands, not his mouth, not the beam of his light. Palms down for slow. One finger at chest height for a step, 2 for 2. He never hollered, because good spotters don't. Behind them, the last orange arrow sign on its thin post made a small sound. It wasn't a clank, and it wasn't a tick. It was the sound thin metal makes when the temperature changes, only the temperature hadn't. The arrow had turned while nobody looked. It pointed back the way they had come, as if to say, "No, this way." Like a kind aunt who remembered a path to the kitchen nobody used anymore. They backed 100 yards, then 50 more, and Lila felt the shoulder fall away a little under her inside trailer tires. Ortega lifted his palm flat. "Stop." She stopped. He swung wide on his toes and pointed with 2 fingers to ask for a gentle crank on the wheel, then rocked his hand to ask for straight. They made a tidy S-turn the way a well-trained couple might do it on a dance floor. The truck followed those small instructions the way big things will move for small ones when there's trust in the system. Through the trees, the river had a not-quite sound, like the absence of an engine you only noticed after miles of having it. The taillights ahead went out for a long blink, and came back. They weren't tinted with brake. They just were. Lila watched them in her side mirror and decided, without proof, that they weren't attached to anything. Some lights in this world were objects. Some were promises. They reached the last junction where the detour arrow had earlier pointed them onto Old 77. The sign there stood with its arrow folded against the post, like a person with arms crossed. The reflective sheeting had an older sheen in the headlights, a dulled sparkle that came from a vintage nobody used now. Ortega lifted his chin at it. "That's from when I was young," he said. "You could peel that film like apple skin. Kids used to nick it for their bikes." "How'd it shine for me?" Lila asked, not expecting an answer. Ortega looked at her like a man who owned a toolbox with more tools than he had places to use them. "Sometimes the road gives you a way to get turned around," he said. Sometimes it gives you a way to get turned around. They pulled out together back toward the interstate. At the first corner, an orange sign lay flat in the ditch, as if it had simply decided to lie down. At the next, there was no sign at all. The motel office at Shady Court had its light off, the neon free of flicker. The payphone booth at the gas station had fogged itself with a thin bloom on the inside glass, like breath. The cat was gone. The billboard skeletons were 2, not 4, then 1, then none. The town's mural was now an advertisement for a roofing company. When they rolled up to the re-entry onto the main line, an actual aero board swung its amber chevrons with the sort of authority that comes from batteries still warm from charging. The message board told a coherent story. A flagger lifted his hand with the bored professionalism of someone who was more worried about sunburn than ghosts. He leaned toward their windows, called out, "We'll take you left lane past the pavers. Sorry about the detour delay." "What detour?" Ortega asked because he could. "Setting it up now," the flagger said. "Haven't sent anyone off yet. You two just in from the east? Lane's clear there. You're good." They rolled slow past the pavers, lights bouncing off heavy machines like fireflies in a jar. The crew didn't look at them twice. It was a blessing. Normalcy and a vest. At the truck stop 10 miles later, Lila and Ortega parked nose out under a tired halogen that threw a circle of respectable light. The soda machine buzzed a note that had nothing to do with harmony. They sat on the curb with their coffee and watched a man check his tie-downs by the glow of his smartphone. Lila set her cup down and rubbed her fingers together. They smelled faintly of river water and coin. "Know that park back there?" she asked Ortega. "Fished it as a boy," he said with a softness that made the word boy not funny in his mouth. Bridge was wood and a bit of steel. Flood year took the center out. You could see the pilings when the river ran low, like ribs. "How many had to be turned around?" Lila asked, aware of the way her voice wanted to whisper and deciding not to let it. Ortega shrugged. "Enough," he said. 3 rigs went in one night in '87, before they barricaded. Newspaper wrote about it like weather. Folks like to forget hard lessons, so the road remembers for them. Sometimes it remembers a little too loud. She nodded and pressed her chin to her jacket collar. She thought about the taillights. She thought about the blocky letters and the way the signs had matched their speed. She thought about her GPS laying down its ribbon and then taking it away like a joke told in poor taste. Back in her truck, she clicked her seatbelt across her lap and glanced down at the side step. A sliver of orange leaned up against the toolbox, light catching on its corner. She frowned and climbed down to look. It was a small arrow cut from a larger sign, no bigger than a license plate, the edges pocked from a saw. Someone had drilled 2 holes like eyes in it at some point, maybe for mounting, maybe just to give it a face. The reflective beads in the sheeting caught the truck stop glow, as if it were bright noon. In the lower corner, in tiny text that only someone like Lila would lean in to read, was a date and a maker's mark. Reflexco 1987. She turned it over. Someone had written in marker on the back, in a hand that liked straight lines, "Return to yard. .4. The marker had bled into the aluminum and gone a little feathery with age, but the letter shapes held steady, a person's calm embedded in ink. Leela stood with it for a minute and let the weight sit in her hand. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't anything more than a scrap of metal and memory. It was also exactly what it was. She drove it to the regional DOT yard the next afternoon between loads. The chain-link fence wore a green slat weave that made it look like an industrious hedge. A man in a state jacket with a sunburned neck and the gait of someone whose knees had negotiated with gravity for years met her at the gate. She held the arrow out. "Found this on my step," she said. "Out by Old 77. He took it with exactly the care it deserved. Not more, not less." "Huh," he said, turning it to the stamp. "Haven't used this supplier since before my time." He ran a thumb across the sheeting. The retro-reflective beads glittered like an old film grain. "We pulled these after that year," he said. "That year?" she asked. "Because letting a person tell a story is a way to say you're listening. Water got higher than the engineers wanted to bet against," he said. "Drivers followed temporary signs onto roads that didn't want them. Folks who never met drew lines on paper for folks they never knew. We try not to do that now." He lifted the arrow and looked at it with a softness that suggested respect. Gives me the shivers when I see the old style." He chuckled like a person who knew better than to laugh, but wanted to anyway. "You know how that is." Lila let him sign a little receipt that said she had returned property. On the way out, she glanced in her mirror. For a second, not longer, not shorter, the sliver of orange in his hand caught the sun and threw it back with a brightness out of proportion to its size. It made a small flash in the hedge of slats like a wink. She drove on. That night, heading west again on a different run, the main line hummed under her as if it had forgiven everything that had been done to it during the day. She passed mile marker 214 and the message board. Blank now, black. The sky had found a different set of stars to show her, or maybe the same ones from a slightly altered angle. Her reefer clicked and breathed, settled and held. The CB stayed companionable and unhelpful in equal measure. She checked her mirrors by habit. Nothing loomed, nothing trailed. She watched the road signs announce their ordinary opinions about speed and distance. All of them were printed just as their manuals said they should be. All of them kept to their posts. She slept later in her berth with the cab curtains pulled and the truck's engine off. Somewhere between waking and the kind of falling that doesn't scare a person, she saw, not with her eyes but with the part of her that makes pictures anyway, a pair of taillights hovering at a height that didn't make sense. They pulsed once, polite. Then they faded like breath on glass. When she woke, it was gentle. She reached for her phone and checked the time. Everything it offered her was reasonable. Outside, a flag moved once on its pole and then forgot to move again. She smiled without showing any teeth, drank what was left of her water, and set her alarm for an hour later. She would keep following directions, as everyone must. But she would also ask her own questions. And whenever a detour sign asked too much, she would look up and listen to the actual world around her, not the borrowed one. The river had made its point. Story number 3. Rhea had a flatbed under her, a tidy stack of trusses bound in webbing and tarp, the straps humming a thin tune in the crosswind. The plains around her lay dark and enormous, a shallow bowl of land rimmed by a low necklace of town lights 20 miles apart. She'd topped off in a town with a grain elevator tall enough to be a landmark, then pointed west toward the next delivery and the quiet hours a driver either made peace with or didn't. She had grown to like them. They were clean. They were honest. Her transponder sat like a small, obedient pet on the windshield. It had beeped green twice that night already, a polite permission that still made her shoulders soften each time. Way stations and Rhea had an understanding. She kept her paperwork the way a librarian kept shelves, and in return the state let her keep rolling. If she had to pull in, it was fine. It was all part of the rhythm. A sign rose out of the night with the kind of authority only government fonts have. Way station 1 mile. Open. The word open glowed a firm green Rhea trusted. She eased to the right lane and breathed out slowly. The air smelled like dry wheat and hot brakes, cooling somewhere she couldn't see. Her dash clock slid toward 2. The road surface changed under her tires, a different aggregate speaking through the wheel like a new accent. The station sat low, a concrete bungalow with a line of sodium lamps strung along the entrance lanes. The lights made the world a little orange and a little out of time, a color left over from old cameras. One arrow over the right-hand lane shone green. A sign. Enter when clear. Another. All trucks. She set her hazards to a slow metronome, checked her mirrors, and took the ramp. The short approach had those shallow grooves cut in it that sang under the tires, to let a driver wake up if they weren't already. Rhea was awake. She watched the glowing red digits at the end of the platform click from 0 to 0, as if clearing their throat. At the stop here line she did, listening to the air set her brakes with the decisive sigh she'd come to love. The little speaker on the left post looked at her like a one-eyed bird. It crackled. Not a voice, not yet. Just that sound old radios make when a hand hovers near them, then calm as a kindly teacher. Pull forward, tractor only. She glanced at the building. No silhouette in the window, no motion behind the glass, except the lazy sweep of a ceiling fan that might have been run by a quiet motor or by a memory built into the blades. She rolled ahead until the steer axle sat on the first pad. The red digits held, then jumped to a number that made sense. Her fuel had her a little heavy on the front, but within reason. Hold, the speaker said. Back 1 foot. She feathered the clutch and gave the rig its slow reverse, eased it up to the polite thump a driver learns by feel. The scale numbers ticked down a hair and steadied. "Drive," the voice said. "Drive slow." She let the drive axles take the pad, then the spread on the trailer. The numbers rolled in a way that would be ordinary to anyone who had ever watched a scale weigh a long, complicated thing. But the timing had an odd rhythm, like a person counting with a cadence from a different language. The printer in the little steel box at the exit lane squealed to life and fed a white tongue of paper into the night air. She took it between two fingers as she rolled to the "Stop for paperwork" line. The slip carried her VIN and plate, as if the scale knew it, which of course it could have, with cameras and transponder tech. It carried the stamp of the station and the time 2:17 a.m. It also carried something she wasn't used to seeing. A typed line in an older font, the letters slightly darker and more solid. "Courtesy check. Right rear inner tire temp elevated. Verify before continuing." She frowned and felt a little strand of worry pluck a string somewhere behind her ribs. Tire temp? This station didn't have infrared sensors on the approach, not that she'd ever seen. You could add them, sure, but the state tended to stick with the basics out here. Weight, lights, paperwork, a glance up and down the frame. She set the brake again and stepped down into a dry night so open it felt like a room with the walls taken away. The station office door was closed. A light burned somewhere deeper inside, low and golden. In the inspection bay beyond, a humming soda machine threw a square of blue-white into the emptiness. It made the concrete look like a stage set. Rhea walked the line of her trailer, hand out. Drivers develop a certain touch, a way to greet their equipment with knuckles and palm without making a ritual of it. She held the back of her wrist near the right rear inner. It gave off heat, like a person who had been moving, and then stood still. Not alarming. Not nothing. Behind her, the speaker said, "Driver on the platform, copy?" The voice was what her grandmother used to call steady, not young, not creaky. Nowhere else to classify it. She took 2 steps back to the box. "Copy," she said, reflexively polite. The words felt odd. Speaking into an empty night like that, the little round grill gave her back a very faint whisper of her own voice. "Pull ahead to office," it said. "Bring paperwork." She collected her folder out of the door pocket and walked up. The entrance door gave under her hand as if it had been unlocked for her and her alone. Inside, the air smelled like paper kept in a dry room and coffee that had decided to be a smell forever. A corkboard on the wall held a square of notices with once bright edges, hours of service cheat sheets, and please report spills, and a laminated reminder about reflective triangles. In the window behind the front counter sat a row of monitors, their greenish light making the room feel underwater. On one, her truck was a gray shape on a gray slab with white numbers floating near it. On another, the approach lanes. On a third, a screen that she could tell used to show something important, and now showed only a cursor in the corner, a little square blinking like a small heartbeat. The office window had a cutout. Behind it, a desk with a blotter stained by years of pens. A brass nameplate lay on its side with dust around it like an outline. Caldwell. The name spoke itself in her head with a flat vowel. The fan turned slow above, the way a fan turns when a person who cares about utility and not about noise picks a medium speed and forgets it there. Rhea laid her papers on the counter. "Transponder pinged me," she said to the room. "Slip says I've got a warm tire." Something on the desk made a small mechanical click, a sound from technology that uses springs instead of code. A printer, the old kind with a thin ribbon, shrugged itself alive and typed. The sound came steady, not the chatter of dot matrix, not the whisper of lasers. It put characters on a perforated form, 3 a second, like a careful person hitting keys. Rhea watched the letters appear without seeing keys move, heard the bell at the end of the line ding softly twice, watched the carriage drift back. Check OK. Recheck hub. Light chalk found. She stood very still, the way people stand when they realize they're part of a moment and don't want to move the wrong way through it. An old box of chalk sat at the window ledge, the pieces worn into blunt bullets. One piece had a flat side with a small smear on it, like it had been pressed against rubber and then set down. The monitors made their little green Cs. The soda machine hummed its same square of blue. A pair of safety glasses hung on a hook by their elastic band, gently swinging though no door had just closed. Rhea turned back to the bay, On the right rear inner, near the bead where she would never have put a mark in the dark, a single chalk X sat pale and exact. She hadn't seen it a minute earlier. She would have sworn. She leaned in and listened. A person who lives with machines learns the difference between silence and quiet. This was quiet. The kind that has a thread of sound inside it, if you know where to listen. A tea kettle hiss. Almost. Not a puncture spitting life into the night. Not that anxious drumbeat. A whisper. She moved her palm close, not touching, and felt warmth she didn't like. The kind that says friction where there shouldn't be friction. Okay, she said to the X, which was also to herself. Okay. Back at the counter, the line printer had advanced. A perforation had torn half by itself. She tore the rest. The letters looked like something out of a municipal storage room. Old. Correct. Remain parked 10 minutes. Cool down. Verify. The way a person would write an instruction if they wanted to ask nicely and be obeyed because you also wanted the right thing. She set a timer on her phone and let the truck sit. The night pressed its ear to the station without asking if it could. The highway murmured past, just out of sight. In the corner of the office, on a shelf that held 3 binders labeled by year with a piece of tape and someone's careful hand, sat a helmet with its visor up. A sticker on the brim had a faded smiley face, and the words, "This is a good day," in letters rubbed down to ghosts. She felt rested and alert at the same time. A rare combination that made everything feel like decisions were easy. At 9 minutes, the printer made another pleasant click. Check now. She went back. The hub was cool enough to lay a knuckle against, still warm at its center in a way that suggested something more than a hill had put heat in it. The whisper continued. Softer. She traced the chalk X with her eyes and decided to call road service at morning light if anything still felt off. For that hour, she would baby it, keep speeds moderate, let the grade do half the work. When she returned to the counter, her paperwork lay in a neat stack. She hadn't left it in. Her inspection form had been stamped, not a digital black mark, but the kind that comes from rubber and ink. Level 2. Passed. A signature sloped across the bottom in blue. Caldwell. No first name. Just the authority of a surname that had done this job long enough not to need introductions. Thank you, Rhea said to a person, a room, a concept of public service. The fan sounded faintly like someone thinking. The monitor that had shown the approach lane flickered through a series of camera cycles for a moment, angles of the world Rhea hadn't walked through. A shot inside a dark break room with a microwave and a poster about lifting with your legs. A rack with orange vests. A close-up of a door labeled records. Then the feed slipped back to her rig, patient and still. As she reached for her folder, the transponder on her windshield chirped green all by itself, the same tone it gave when a station waved her on. It shouldn't have. There were no gantries here, no live sensor aimed at her glass. The chirp felt like a small hand on a shoulder. Rhea put a smile behind her teeth. On the way out, the red light over the exit lane stayed steady longer than it should have. She waited, hand at neutral, brake set. The night held its own breath. Then the lamp went green with a mild reluctance. The barrier arm lifted with a motion that belonged to a machine with fresh grease and an old soul, and she rolled past the marker that said, "Have a safe trip," in letters that had faded to a soft oatmeal color. The next 30 miles, she treated that right rear like an egg. The highway accepted her pace without waves of headlights stacking in frustration. The planes made that long, low C sound they make when grass is the only thing moving. A town with 5 streetlights blinked a mild greeting. Her dash clock slid from 2:17 to 2:18, as if it had waited for permission. Somewhere behind her, an owl called the same soft question twice. At a 24-hour place that promised breakfast any time, she pulled in and rolled slow by the shop where a mechanic was sorting sockets by feel. "Got a minute for a listen?" she asked. And he did. He was the kind of person who could tell how many threads were left on a bolt by the way it complained. He knelt by the chalk X, put his ear near the hub, and made a sound that was not alarmed and not pleased. "Bearing starting to go," he said into the night like an aside. "You didn't push it, did you?" She shook her head. "No," she said. "Got told not to." He raised an eyebrow. "By who?" "Way station," she said. He glanced toward the east, toward no particular shape. They close nights, he said. Run at daylight. Everyone knows that. She handed him the slip. He held it like a photograph. Huh, he said. I haven't seen this stamp in 15 years. He thumped his finger on the name. Caldwell taught me to tie down an argument, he said. Used to grumble, used to write neat, retired before my cousin came on, died a few summers back. He handed the paper back with both hands, like a person returns a borrowed book. They jacked the axle enough to take the weight, spun the wheel, and heard what needed hearing: a dry rush, a distant sand in the gears sound that said tomorrow would have been a memory a person told with a different voice if she hadn't stopped. The mechanic called in an early morning favor. By the time the sun put orange on the edge of the pumps, Rhea had a new bearing, and a gratefulness she wasn't going to diminish with a joke. On the road again, she kept the slip above her visor. She didn't show it to anyone who wasn't going to treat it well. A week later, at the same stretch, the station sign said open again in that shade of green she trusted. She rolled in more out of courtesy than obligation. The building sat quiet, blinds drawn. The fan above the front counter had no reason to turn. The monitors were dark squares. A printed sheet taped to the glass said closed 7 p.m., M 7 amperes, M, in a clear, recent hand. She nodded to the note, as if the paper could see her, and took the ramp back to the highway. From then on, once in a while, the transponder would chirp at 17 inches, the emptiest part of the night, even if there was no station for 100 miles. A tiny, polite sound. She began to treat it like the world clearing its throat to say, check your mirrors, check your heat, check yourself. Sometimes, she'd find nothing and feel good for the looking. Once she found a strap beginning to scuff where it touched metal. Once a marker light had lost its ground and blinked a fraction of a blink shorter than it should. Small things, the kind that make big things. Years down the line, a rookie at a truck stop asked Rhea about ghost stories with half a grin and a half dare, the way rookies do when they want to believe and need an adult to say it's okay to. Rhea shrugged and told him a different truth. You'll hear things sometimes when the road is the only friend talking, she said, wiping her hands on a rag that had seen more engines than most people had. If what you hear keeps you alive and keeps other people safe, you don't have to name it anything. You can just listen. She didn't tell him about the chalk X. She didn't tell him about the desk where the dust had kept a little outline around the nameplate. She didn't tell him about the way the printer bell had sounded two soft dings like a stranger calling you by your first name with permission you hadn't exactly given. Some things lived better in the quiet drawer inside a person where gratitude fit. On a clear afternoon months later, she stopped by the station in daylight, coffee in hand, to say something to the people who wore the badge now. A young inspector with a sunburn line and laugh-creased eyes listened while she described the slip without making a face. He took the paper into the back and returned with a photo torn from a bulletin board. In it, a man stood slightly off-center so the scale house sign could be in the frame with him. He had the square-shouldered posture of someone who believed in brackets and had learned to accept parentheses. On the brim of his hard hat, a faded sticker read, "This is a good day." The nameplate on the window behind him said Caldwell. The inspector tapped the photograph. "He's the reason I'm in this chair and not a ditch," he said softly. "Caught a cracked wheel I swore I didn't have when I was a kid hauling hay. Some folks get to keep working after they clock out. Ask me, that's fair." Rhea took the picture in with the same care she'd given the stamp, and the chalk, and the late-night fan. Outside, a gust pushed dust across the lot, like a thought passing across someone's face. A crow landed on the post at the entrance, and tilted its head as if it wanted to read the instructions. She left the slip with the station to pin up under the photo if they wanted, or to file, or to lose to time like other papers. They thanked her like a person thanks someone who returns a wallet after finding it on a park bench. That night, somewhere nowhere near that station, the transponder chirped at 2:17 and didn't chirp again. She smiled into the dark and checked her mirrors. Everything behind her looked right. Everything ahead looked like work she could do. Somewhere, far from any speaker's grill, a printer bell might have rung twice. Or maybe that was just the way the tires found a seam in the road and crossed it. Steady, steady, steady. Story number 4. June hauled a prefabricated cabin on a lowboy, the kind of oversized load that made every sign feel close and every shadow look like a measurement. The cabin sat strapped and braced, window openings blank, a house in transit that would be a life once it reached the mountains. Her banners read wide load. Her flag snapped when the wind bothered to come down off the ridgeline, and the amber strobes on her headache rack gave off their steady, thoughtful blink. She had permits folded into a binder so neatly the papers looked ironed. The plan said she would take the pass at daylight with a pilot car. The plan said a lot of things. At the staging turnout below the grade, wind hissed in rabbit brush and ran along the guard cables like fingers over a harp. The highway carried night traffic in a low stream. June checked chain binders again and walked the perimeter of the load with a flashlight beam tucked tight. The beam slid over factory-straight lumber, over piano hinges, over the mark of a carpenter's pencil that had made it all. The way to the big road. She liked that part, the human traces that crossed over into the abstract miles. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. The escort coordinator's voice came through with a tired professionalism. "June, your pilot had a breakdown. We can get you a replacement at first light. Park and rest. That pass is fussy at night. Narrow shoulders. Tricky rock cut. Copy?" "Copy," June said. She looked up at the sky as if her eyes could confirm sunrise on command. The forecast called for a wind event by mid-morning. Better to be over the top before dust turned the grade into a beige wall. She could stage at the summit lot and sleep in daylight. If something opens sooner. "Not tonight," the coordinator said. "Wait for day." She let the call end and stood with the smell of creosote in her nose and road dust on her shoes. The amber strobes feathered the edges of the world in small, calm pulses. In the distance, a lone set of headlights crested a low hill and slid down toward her turnoff, slowed, and did the small lean that a car does when it pulls into a shoulder with intent. It was a white sedan with a narrow light bar on top and an old-fashioned sign rack sitting proud of the trunk. The words, "Oversize load ahead," glowed in amber squares, each letter its own panel like a careful marquee. The door magnet was plain and square, Lantern Pilot Service. The number under it looked like a landline, given in an era when phones weighed something. The driver rolled his window down, and his elbow found the sill like it had been trained there by years. "You, June?" he asked through a CB mic, not his voice like he'd been on channel with her already. The radio in her dash chimed alive on its own. Channel 18. There was no call sign exchange, just the certainty in his cadence that he'd been doing this on nights when the world didn't plan. "Copy," June said, still half outside her cab. One hand on the mirror bracket. Was told to wait for day. "Day's bringing wind," the man said. The way he said wind made the word a thing with corners and edges. "We'll run it gentle. 37's your number. I keep it lit. You keep it honest." She didn't get a name, but she got a tone that belonged to the people who take other people's loads personally. He stepped out long enough to pull a pole from his trunk and set it at full extension. A fiberglass whip with a glowing amber tip rose above roofline, an old-school guide used when mirrors lied. The light at the tip wasn't LED cold. It had a soft core like a candle remembers. June hesitated the appropriate amount. She walked to the front of the cabin and eyeballed the corners. She pictured the rock cut she'd been warned about, a narrow pinch worn into the hillside where the lane felt smaller and the sky felt closer. 37 struck her ear in the way specific numbers do when they carry memory. She nodded once and climbed in. "I'm with you," she said into her mic. "Channel 18? 18, he said. "Call me Lantern. Call me if you lose sight. If we get whistling at the cables, we pause. Center up at the cut. No high beams in the narrows. Let your strobes talk. Lantern." The word fit the quiet. His amber rack went to steady, and he rolled from the turnout as smoothly as a steady hand draws a straight line. June eased out behind him, the lowboy answering her throttle with that slow, deliberate willingness that comes with weight and confidence. She held 37 by the tatch and by feel. The tip of his pole with its warm dot floated above the hood of her load like a star that agreed to be hired for the job. The grade leaned them toward the mountain. On the uphill, wind came from nowhere and everywhere. The cables on the right sang a high, thin note that rose and fell as they passed the posts. "Hear it?" Lantern asked. "Copy," June said. "That's a singer," he said, easy. "If she goes to a whistle, we tuck. You'll know. You won't mistake it." He kept talking. Not chatter, but the kind of unhurried counsel that fills the spaces where nerves would otherwise find room. Marker at mile 76 sits shy to the shoulder. I'll take center on the lane. You mirror me. Signs will lie about width in the cut because the slab shifted last winter. You keep your mind on your corner. The first curve brought them along a low cliff where the highway had been bitten out of stone in a broad, patient bite. The rock's face shone in their light like it had been polished by tires of air. Lantern set his car, so his left tires kissed the center line, and his right side ran comfort with the drop. He tapped his brake for a curve, not as warning to June so much as a courtesy to the road, and the amber rack made an ooze of color across the rock. It looked like the inside of a furnace in a story and felt nothing like heat. Her strobes combed the cliff for irregularities that weren't there and would be there anyway in the mind. 37 felt slow and complicated, and just right. The whip light checked the roof of the load for the clear she needed. Cut in two, Lantern said gently. Let the wall have your passenger mirror's blue idea of space. Trust the inches you can't see. She did what he told her to do. The world drew itself close, then let go again. At mile 76, a marker leaned like a polite bow. His brake lights found it and then let it pass without a fuss. At mile 77, a pair of reflectors on the right had been turned sideways by a wind or a hand and winked unfamiliar. Ignore those, Lantern said. She lost a crew out here a long while back. Thinks she's clever with tricks. She didn't ask who she meant by she. The road, the mountain, the wind, any of them could wear pronouns on a night when stories needed stitching. They reached the run of narrow, where the rock cut pinched, and the center line felt like it had been drawn after the fact. Lantern dropped to 35 and said, Center up, nose at me, no high beams. June killed her brights. The night went from a show to a chamber. Her strobes painted the rock with slow brush strokes. The whip's amber kept to its warm star tone. The house on her deck slid the narrow like a shy animal through a gate. She watched her corner. She watched Lantern. She breathed. Halfway through, the cables did go from a singer to a whistle. It rose quick and thin and true. Lantern's amber rack blinked twice, the signal for hold. He braked to a stop with the sort of calm that mistaught no lesson. June rolled to stillness with the low purr of heavy things being asked to wait. The whistle curled around the rock like a thread pulled from a sleeve. Dust came in, not a wall but a veil, the kind that softens edges and teaches patience. Lantern's voice carried on the channel as if the air were not full of grit. 5 minutes, he said. She's telling stories. Let her get it out. They sat with engines idling low, dust making halos that had never been blessed. June watched the particles swim in her own strobe light and felt time do that thing it does on empty nights, stretching and shrinking at its own pleasure. The whistle eased to the singer again, then to a silent string. Lantern's brake lights let go their red. We're walking, he said. Hold 33 until the bench. They made the bench, a wide shoulder carved flat where, in daylight, tourists would park and pose with distant peaks. In the dark, it was just a place where the highway remembered generosity. Lantern's whip tilted as the wind found it. Bridge ahead, he said. Steel truss over a dry wash. You'll want the center crown. Watch the overhead joints. They'll look like they're lower than they are. They aren't. At the bridge, his amber spilled over rivets and bars and made the steel look like a drawing done with light. June aimed for the crown and pretended the world was an inch narrower than it was. The strobe's beat made the steel seem to move in slow motion, like the bridge was breathing. They cleared it. On the far side, old reflectors on fence posts blinked with a vintage glitter that put the decade wrong. Lantern's brake lights tapped once. You're good, he said. She can't help showing off. They climbed again. The grade got honest. 37 was work a person could like. June watched her water temp and her fuel like a hawk might watch a mouse with respect. She let the old habits settle. Eyes sweeping, mirrors, gauges, road, lantern. He kept talking when it mattered, and kept quiet when it didn't. He named things that had names only at night. The flat spot that isn't, the kettle, the scarecrow lines where the wind carved and rewrote snow in winter. How long you been escorting? June asked at a small straight where words could afford to change places. Long enough, Lantern said. Not coy, just complete. Long enough to know dust is the most persuasive foreman we've got. long enough to know you don't bargain with rock. They reached the summit with a matter-of-factness that felt like a reward for humility. The lot at the top sat empty, its gate chain hanging in a closed loop, without a lock. The sign at the entrance, reflective for daylight drivers, offered official hours and a stern warning about overnight staging. Lantern pulled in without comment and took a slow turn around the perimeter as if counting ghosts. June followed and parked nose out just inside the fence where the gravel sat packed and trustworthy. Her strobes found bare patches where tires had kissed the ground in years before. She set her brake and let the weight of the trip settle out of her arms. Lantern idled alongside and leaned into his mic. Drop your pressure on the strobes, June. Let the lot have the quiet. You can rest here. Wind's going to take the downhill for fools in the morning. You're not a fool. I want to pay you, she said, reaching for where invoices live. The answer came like a hand set gently over a stack of papers. No need, Lantern said. You'll pass it on when somebody needs you to light the corner. She looked over to thank him with her face as well as her voice. His window was a rectangle of night and a silhouette. She saw the outline of his hat and the curve of a hand at the wheel. There was nothing theatrical about him. He looked like a man who knew roads and sleep in equal measure. Lantern, she said. Thank you. Lantern out, he replied, and his amber rack dimmed not like a switch but like a memory. The whip light with its warm star bowed once on its fiberglass spine. He rolled away and disappeared down the far end of the lot where the chain hung. When June glanced up, the chain lay on the post like a friendly snake sunning in a pattern it had chose itself. If there had been a lock, it had decided to be someplace else. She cut her strobes and let her cab go to soft dark. The wind passed the lot with the sound of somebody telling a story in another room. Sleep found her the way it finds people who have done something difficult correctly. Before her eyes closed, she noticed a small wedge on her step, wood worn smooth by years of boots. A wheel chock she didn't own. In black stencil on its face, simple letters read, Lantern. Morning came with a false calm, and then a gust that made flags on pickups snap with no rhythm at all. A highway patrol SUV idled by the gate while the sun worked on the frost. A woman in a state jacket stood with a thermos and a notebook and a face built for light talk that could go serious easy. June climbed down and nodded. You get through in the night? The officer asked, already knowing the answer. With a pilot, June said. Lantern Pilot Service. The officer's eyes flickered like the idea had brushed past her before. We don't have anyone on schedule by that name, she said. Night escorts are rare up here. We usually keep heavy and wide safe till the day shift. She sipped her coffee. You good for the downhill after this blow? Might be a hold. June offered the chalk like a clue. The officer turned it in her hands and smiled at the feel of it. Haven't seen this stamp in years, she said. There was a fellow went by Lantern. Old school. Taught half the temp crews where to stand so they didn't learn the hard way. Died on a bad dust night, not on the road. In his yard, truth be told. Sometime after the season, we keep finding reasons to say his name when the past gets opinionated. She handed the wedge back. Funny. The chain was on last night. I shut it. This morning, chain's off. Gate's got a mind when the wind nags. The yard manager from the maintenance shed wandered over with a yo-yo gate, looked at the wedge and whistled. He used to stencil everything like that, he said. Lantern didn't like his gear walking away. After he passed, some of his bits turned up here and there, like stray dogs. That chalk lived on our shelf for a while. Then it didn't. June did the downhill after lunch, tucked behind a pace car with a light bar that flickered on purpose, and a driver whose humor was of the daylight kind. She kept gentler than the grade demanded. She heard the cable sing and did not hear the whistle. At the base, wind braided sand across the low spots and tar strips, pretty and treacherous in equal measure. She made the delivery at a site where a foundation waited like an open palm. The crew waved and offered coffee in cups the size of oil filters. That evening, she drove back to the staging lot, because returning a thing that wasn't hers had become the most important item in a day full of items. The chain was up and clipped. The lot sat empty and obedient. She went to the maintenance shed. The yard manager pointed at a pegboard with chalk lines traced around missing tools, a shrine of order. Hang him there, he said. He'll go walking when he wants. June hooked the chalk onto a peg. the word lantern staring out in perfect plain font. It looked natural there, like it had always been one of the shapes the board had been cut to hold. The officer tapped the board under it. Someone had chalked a small outline around that very chalk long ago, a faint ghost shape that matched the wedge's angles. June could see the old chalk under the new wood, a promise kept in reverse. On her next run, nights later and miles elsewhere, Channel 18 woke for a breath as she eased through a different town at an hour when dogs noticed more than people did. The speaker lifted the slightest hum, and then a voice that didn't insist on being a voice said, steady as a hand, "Center up. 37. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even words, if she'd been asked. It was the shape of those words, and it was enough. The world doesn't always hold a person accountable to what they've done for others. Sometimes it does. June drove with a respect that had a name. When she saw someone wide and uncertain on a shoulder, she threw her strobes for them and took a minute to light their corner while they measured a doorway through the dark. A few said thank you. A few waved without looking, too busy living. That was fine. Once, in a diner with daylight sun burning a rectangle into a vinyl booth, June paid a check for a pilot driver she'd never met and left a note a person could read or not. Keep the light steady. Under that, in neat block letters, she wrote one more thing. 37. The server carried it to the register like it might hum if she put her ear close. And if, on lonely nights, on the long side of nowhere, an amber dot hovered where a person needed it to if it hung above a hood for a few seconds while the world narrowed and then widened again, no one made a fuss. You don't gawk at a lantern when you need both hands for the wheel. You glance, you listen, you go where you're told, and you get home. Story number 5. Darius rolled up to the east gate of the distribution campus with the kind of quiet relief a person feels when the long miles turn into a single address. The place had a way of looking bigger than a map showed concrete like a small city, rows of docks numbered higher than most elevators dared. Buildings with their own zip codes within a zip code. The guard shack glowed in a small, sympathetic way. A yellow pencil sat in a coffee cup on the counter, sharpened down to a stub that had outlasted better pens. Bill of lading, the guard said, and Darius passed it through the slot with his license, and a smile he could make even after midnight. The guard scanned the barcode like a person might read a friend's name, clicked a few keys on a screen and said, Gate F. Dock 147 amperes. Follow blue arrows to the north annex. Yard speed 5. Keep radio on for instructions. Channel Dodachi if you've got it. I've got it, Darius said, and meant the radio more than the confidence. The guard slid a visitor pass back across the counter, a flimsy badge with a faint logo in blue, as if too many runs through the laminator had lightened its memory. He pulled forward. The gate arm lifted with authority and a squeak. Inside, the yard widened into lanes, painted with bones of direction. Blue arrows stenciled on concrete, stop bars thick and white, small squares that told trucks where to wait, with words like hold here, 1 per lane, in tidy capitals. The sodium lights washed everything in their certain orange. Farther in, newer LEDs made islands of crisp white. Electric pallet jacks whispered near doors. Farther down, a yard goat eased a trailer into a dock, with a push so gentle it looked like thought instead of force. Welcome, northbound, the radio said in a voice that lived somewhere between a friendly bulletin and a lullaby. Channel 12 had that soft hiss that made it feel alive. Take row D for blue arrows. Do not enter row K. Repeat, do not enter row K. Darius thought he'd misheard. The guard had said Channel 12, sure, but the voice did not have the brittle ring of public address. It had a warmth the speakers over the doors never find. He glanced at the display on his CB. The channel read 12. The physical world offered the blue arrows at his tires, so he let himself do what the night wanted. He followed. Row D turned between a long wall of docks and a wide promenade of empty spaces. Safety cones nested on their sides like sleeping birds. Forklifts chirped with reverse alarms, the sound living in the air rather than in any one place. On his right, digital dock signs hung above each bay, glow-green numbers that matched the numbering of a tidy world. Every so often one would flip from green to amber with a soft decision, then back again. It felt like watching a colony breathe. North Annex traffic, be advised, the voice said. Lights flicker in Sector 2. Continue. No issue for trucks. He passed Sector 2 and watched the LEDs over there give a thoughtful ahem and then steady themselves. He wouldn't have noticed without being told, which was its own kind of comfort. At the end of row D, a blue arrow painted on the concrete advised a hard right. 147 amperes lived down a side lane like a house with a number you had to know to find. He turned there, wide and slow. Mirrors full of a world that had learned how to move big numbers of things without spilling them. The lanes narrowed here. Stacks of empty pallets rose with the severe straightness of disciplined bricks. A forklift eased by with its load held close, driver's face lit by his own screen. He nodded once. A worker's nod that means we're both doing something necessary. Darius nodded back. "Hold at the yellow hash," the voice said in his speaker. "Count to 30 before the turn." He didn't argue with a voice that sounded like it had watched the yard long enough to know the flavor of its habits. He stopped at a set of diagonal yellow stripes painted across the lane and watched his side mirror for the half minute. At 22, a yard hostler popped out from behind a stack, pulling a 53-foot box at an angle that would have crossed his nose if he'd continued. The hostler driver threw a hand up, a quick apology, then grinned like the night had reminded him of his manners. Darius smiled and lifted a hand back. "Thanks," he said to nobody. "Thanks anyway. Proceed," the voice in the radio said, light with humor and relief, and Darius rolled on. Dock 147 amperes was 3 down on the left. The number glowed green from a screen so bright it threw its own reflection on the wet patch beneath. There was a sheen on the concrete there that looked like the aftermath of a mop, or coolant, or something else that turned traction into opinion. His brake shoes made that small, careful sound when he set them, metal deciding not to let gravity choose, just yet. "Hold off 147 amperes, the radio said gently. "Take 149B management override. Tell 'em Blue Shift sent you." Darius looked up at the dock signs, as if they might weigh in with a second opinion. 149B stood steady 2 doors down, its bumper rubber clean and square, its light above the bay a reassuring yellow. He thumbed the button on his mic, felt silly, spoke anyway. "Copy," he said. "Blue Shift." "Good," the voice said, as if they had just done the right thing together. "Chocks are at 149. Watch your mirrors. The blind side has a ladder stored wrong. Push it with your tire if you need to." Between 147 amperes and 149B, a ladder lay leaned at an angle that asked for trouble. Darius stepped down, moved it to flat. His gloved hands careful without drama. He tossed a "heads up" to the forklift man who had set it, and got a sheepish thumbs up in return. He backed to 149B, nose swing gentle, trailer straight as a drawn string, bumpers kissing the rubber with a whisper. Chocks went under his wheels with a satisfying thunk. He set brake, dropped his dock plate light, and felt the rumble of inside equipment press into his floor. On his way to the receiving office, he passed a bay where a digital sign still glowed in a stubborn 12-4. The numbers not moving. The loading clerk behind the glass had a pen in her hair and a jacket zipped halfway like she'd been on her way to the cold storage and been interrupted mid-thought. "Door number?" she asked with a voice that had been awake longer than she had planned. "Was told 147, Darius said, lifting an eyebrow, "but moved to 149B by Blue Shift." The clerk made a face like she was trying to place a tune. "Blue Shift?" She tapped her keyboard with a competence that didn't need coffee to exist. "We call it nights now." She looked past him to the bay. 147's got a leak under it, she said, half to him, half to herself. "Coolant from earlier. We flagged it on the work order, but the dock display hasn't updated." How did you know?" Then she waved her own question away. "Doesn't matter. You picked the right one. 149B's clear." "Someone on the radio," Darius said. "Channel 12. We don't use 12, she said, and then softened it with kindness. "We use 16 for inside, 7 for yard. 12's been quiet since they changed the equipment last winter." She took his paperwork and reached for a stamp. The stamp clacked with a confidence that settled the world. "We'll get you unloaded. You want coffee? While you wait?" He did. The kind offered in paper cups lived on a side table with sugar packets and a stack of lids that had learned to shift their weight together. In the break room, a bulletin board held notices laminated to outlast generations. Stretch before you lift above shoulder. Report all spills. Do not prop open fire doors. In one corner, a photo pinned under curling tape showed a crew in blue vests, clustered around a cake whose frosting had tried to spell out 2 whole sentences and had given up. Someone had written names under the faces in marker. Some had last names, some just had nicknames written the way a family might. Under one, in tidy letters, Blue. Night's lead. He didn't stare. A person knows when a room deserves its privacy. He took his coffee and let the hum of the vending machines fill the silence where a television might have tried to explain the world. Back at the cab, he keyed the yard radio again, half expecting nothing, half expecting the voice to answer like a friend finishing a thought. Appreciate the reroute, he said, because courtesy holds even if there's no one to pin it to. Check your lines on the way out, the voice replied, so soft he nearly missed it. Blue chalk on your service line tells you someone's been kind. Copy, Darius said, and felt his shoulders find a new place to sit. The unload moved with the efficiency of a body that has decided to be healthy. Pallets came off and disappeared into aisles with the grace of a dance. A supervisor in a neon jacket stopped long enough to put a spill cone at 147 amperes in radio maintenance with a tone that said, "Don't run, but don't stroll either." The digital dock lists updated one by one with small green check marks, as if they'd just remembered how. His trailer walked lighter under him with each forklift roll. He listened to the sounds the way a person listens to a household waking up trucks at idle, doors thumping, the steady beep of machines reversing, the brief laughter of workers comparing days. When the green at 149B went to blue, and the inside light flashed for his attention, he pulled forward to clear the dock, climbed down, and looked at his airlines because someone had asked him to. On the red emergency line, nothing. On the blue service line, near the glad hand, a neat stripe of chalk blue drew a quiet line. Not a tag, not a scrawl. A line like the smallest courtesy. He touched it with a fingertip. It came away smudged the way chalk should. At the exit, the guard on duty had changed. This one had a pencil behind her ear, and the brisk movements of someone who made checklists for things that were important. "You're Darius," she said, more to her screen than to him. 149B. Unloaded. Any issues? None, he said, then added because the question wanted a companion. Except a radio angel moved me off a slick dock. Channel 12. She gave him a look drivers get from people who spend nights on the edges of other people's nights. Radio angel, she said, letting the words roll around in her mouth to see if they fit. We don't keep 12 up. And the maintenance note for 147 didn't hit the system until you were already boarded. You must have good timing. I haven't heard that in a while, Darius said. Usually I have okay timing and better luck. From the far end of the shack, a man with a mustache like a better decade leaned back on his stool and stretched. He wore a high-vis with its reflective tape, neatly repaired with more tape. You said blue shift? He asked without turning his head all the way, as if the story had needed only that much attention to find its shape. That's what the voice said, Darius replied. Told me to hold at the hash, skip 147, watch a ladder, look for chalk. The man nodded slowly. We called nights blue when I started, he said. Not for the color of the vests, for Benny Blue. He worked the yard before everything got labeled and numbered and barcoded. Used the radio like it was a conversation instead of a policy. He had a way of seeing the bend in the road before it was drawn. He shrugged like a person not trying to sell anyone anything, stuck around long after he clocked out for good. He pointed with his chin toward the break room. Toward the photo Darius had noticed. He's the one in the middle. He was good at telling people to wait 10 seconds. The guard with the pencil gave the man a look that said not everyone wanted stories told, then softened it with a grin that said she wanted this one to be told anyway. We don't put that in the training manual, she said to Darius. But if you hear someone say hold at the hash, you listen. We find half the near misses with that trick alone. Darius smiled. I'll add it to my manual, he said. On his way out, he passed row K, because curiosity has its own speed limit. A work truck with a flashing amber bar sat across its entrance with cones, fanned like a careful skirt. A forklift idled in the lane beyond. Hood up. A mechanic in coveralls looked up and gave Darius a nod that meant he had oil on his hands and couldn't wave but would if he could. Darius lifted his palm back and let the moment be a simple hello. The gate arm lifted. The night outside the yard felt different, thinner, as if there were fewer corners to check. The highway accepted him the way highways do when you're empty, with an eagerness that has nothing to do with speed and everything to do with relief. The numbers on his ELD looked manageable. The sky had set its clock ahead of him by an hour, and he would catch it in the morning somewhere outside a town that named a street after its first schoolteacher. At a truck stop down the road, he fueled slowly, ran a squeegee over glass, and took a minute to clean grime off the bug shield, because small acts of neatness make the world more readable. Under the light at the back of the cab, where he kept bungees and spare gloves, he noticed a small strip of blue tape neatly wrapped around his spare glad-hand gasket canister. He hadn't taped it. He didn't remember anyone who would have thought to. It was the same blue as the chalk on his line. He left it there. Later, on another midnight at another yard, he found himself at a different hash mark in a different lane, counting to 30 because it had become a habit, because it had become a ritual. At 26, a tug truck slid through an opening he would have taken. He smiled and kept counting out loud anyway, because saying numbers into the air made them solid. A week later, passing through the big campus again for a different load, he stopped by the break room and looked at the board the way a person reads the names of towns on a map they might never visit. Someone had replaced the curling tape on the photo with fresh. A note hung beside it in new ink, not a policy but a favor. If you hear hold at the hash, hold. M. The handwriting belonged to the clerk with the pen in her hair. Practical. Clear. No one made a fuss of him coming and going, which is all a driver really asks for. He wasn't looking for proof. He was looking for good advice. He found it often enough now that he smiled when Channel 12 breathed and said nothing, which sometimes felt like its own kind of permission. On nights when the yard lights threw exact rectangles onto the concrete, he would look down them like a person looks down a long hallway at home. If he caught a suggestion of blue in a chalk line on the ground, or in the reflection off a screen no longer connected to any system, he took it as fellowship. If he didn't, he kept his mirrors lit with his own care. If a voice said, quiet as a suggestion, check your lines, he checked them. If he caught himself about to turn because a lane looked tempting instead of safe, he waited for the next arrow and let the tempo be set by something outside of hurry. He went through without a scratch. Others did too. Whether or not they'd say it out loud, more than a few drivers would stop at the yellow hash and let the count get to the number the night wanted. It didn't take any faith. It took patience. It took the understanding that some places hold on to the best of what was done inside them and keep offering it to anyone kind enough to listen. At a diner near a smaller warehouse months later, Darius met a young yard driver chewing a sandwich at 3 a.m., the way youth can do without count. The kid laughed too fast and spoke in a rush about near misses and graceful saves, and the first time he backed an angle no one thought he would make. Darius listened and then gave him one thing. Slow at the yellow hash, he said. Even if someone behind you wants you to hurry, count to 30. You'll be surprised how many problems sit right past 20. The kid rolled that around like a new gear and nodded. Who told you that? He asked. Darius took a sip of coffee and let the warmth answer. A shift that knows how to be blue without being sad, he said. And they sat a while longer with the night, which was enough. Story number 6. Evan hauled a food-grade tanker, a bright stainless barrel that reflected the night like a stretched ribbon of water. The load was liquid sugar, heavy and patient, baffles inside to tame the slosh but never fully tame it. He liked the way a tanker made him a better listener. Every change of speed and grade returned a small opinion from the liquid behind him, an elbow nudge to remind him to be smooth. The route from the refinery cut across miles of flats and marsh on a causeway that had been poured when concrete still had the kind of confidence that lasts generations. The railings were low, the lanes narrow, the water dark on either side and full of quiet noises the wind translated for nobody. Midnight had just settled into itself when he merged onto the causeway. The sky looked like old glass clear enough for stars, a haze around the edges. The sense of some distant humidity deciding not to become fog. He kept the cruise at a number he trusted, and the engine in its contented range, a thrum that kept company without asking for attention. His CB sat on 19, alive with a gentle hiss that feels like breathing. Every so often, a voice drifted in from far away to ask after a mile marker or a smoky report, then ghosted back out. On the ramp, he picked up a tail. Headlights fell in behind him at the right distance, not aggressive, not shy. He flipped his marker lights twice, a courtesy hello. The lights behind answered with a single blink of high beams, polite, quick, the unspoken code for rolling with you. Evan checked his mirror, noting the 3x5 of light that meant a tractor in good tune, not a four-wheeler hunting gaps. The reflection off his polished barrel threw the other set into a long smear of white, as if the night had put a brush to it. The first miles of the causeway passed like a well-told song. Road joints clicked under his tires in a rhythm that matched the slow pulse of the liquid behind him. The guardrail posts slid by at equal spaces, measuring his progress as if they were counting with him. The air smelled faintly of brine and hot steel cooling. A wading bird lifted from the edge and crossed the lanes ahead, legs trailing, wings wide, one of those midnight grace notes that the world offers to people who are awake to see them. "Back door, you good?" a voice said on the box, warm, flat, as local as the marsh. It keyed up without preamble, the way people used to talk when distance felt shorter. Evan thumbed the mic. 10-4, he said, reflexively steady. "Liquid load. I'll keep it smooth. I'll ride with you through the gaps," the voice replied. "Wind slides sideways after the mile-half-and marker. Keep her left of the crown there. I'll box your tail if the little ones get uppity." "Appreciate you," Evan said, because manners fit the hour. He glanced in the mirror. The headlights behind hewed to the perfect 2-second gap that safety posters love. When he eased for a shallow curve, they eased. When he floated the throttle for a joint that had grown a little proud from heat and seasons, they floated. He tried to count marker lights along the top bar, but the barrel's reflection doubled and elongated them until the exact number refused to be named. It felt like a rig with good maintenance. It felt like any other companion a person could ask for in a long night. At mile 7, the causeway lifted onto an older section, the concrete a fraction paler, the seams closer together. A low crosswind found them and pushed when the rails dipped a little. Evan laid his steering light into it, a pressure as gentle as telling a child to step left. The liquid behind his cab leaned and then settled. The lights behind him didn't widen or shrink. He thought of the way old team drivers talked about a perfect draft, 2 vehicles moving in a stream of air that felt like one. 12 up ahead, the voice said. "Right lane breaks up at the joint. Crown's your friend." Evan slid half a tire toward the paint and felt the smoother line under him. He glanced at the sign for mile 12. It flashed his number back at him and then, for the smallest fraction of a second, showed a different set of digits entirely, like someone had once stenciled 212, and the night remembered it. He blinked away the thought and checked his gauge cluster by habit. Everything sat where experience said it should. A pickup eased down an on-ramp and tried to thread the needle between him and his tail. Evan saw it in the mirror, the shape of impatience, the quick dart that turns into a sudden second thought when the space looks different from inside. He lifted his foot to let the math be kinder. Before he could complete the adjustment, a sound rose in the night that every highway person recognizes. An air horn, deep and decisive, not angry so much as instruction spoken at volume. The pickup reconsidered. It tucked behind the back rig without drama. Evan never saw the horn's trumpet in his mirror. He felt its judgment all the same. A useful piece of punctuation in a sentence that had been about to run on too long. "Good hold," the voice said, amused and approving. "He'll live to be courteous tomorrow, and maybe even tonight." Evan smiled. "He heard you," he said. "Sometimes that's enough," the voice replied. At mile 15, the causeway crossed a cut in the marsh where the wind had a habit of learning a new trick. The guardrail dropped a foot for a maintenance pullout, and the world beside them widened in a breath. The tanker let him know about it with a small wave he could feel through his seat. He let off a shade more, barely enough to register on the speedometer, and watched the water settle in his mirror like a change of mind. The headlights behind him held their spot like they'd been painted on. The CB went soft. Static lived a half second behind their words and then forgot them. Evan found himself expecting another sentence and not minding the quiet when none came. He flipped his dash camera's rear view on with a thumb, more to give his eyes one more angle than because he didn't trust the simple read of a mirror. The screen showed highway emptiness, the rhythmic pop of reflectors, the hazed glow of his own marker lights painting the stainless. In the bottom corner, a ghost of white drifted and steadied, a suggestion of shape the camera never resolved. He told himself cameras lie at night. He told himself truth, too. At mile 19, the causeway narrowed for a bridge over a channel used by boats and birds. Metal railings replaced the concrete kind, and the drubbing note of tires on expansion joints came through the cab like a drum played softly in an adjoining room. A sign advised trucks to hold lanes. The temptation to drift away from the railing was a human one and to be resisted. Evan centered. The liquid agreed with him. The lights behind matched in a way you could admire. Halfway across, the radio breathed. "Hold 30 for the center joint," the voice said. Evan feathered him down with a pressure you couldn't have seen if you watched his ankle. He hit the joint at the precise moment his load would thank him for it. The tanker's baffles murmured a yes. The headlights in his mirror did the same yes, in their own language. On the far side, he thought he'd lost his tail. The mirror showed empty black like a stage, with the curtains pulled after a show. He peered into the convex and saw only the round world of the road, small and abstract. He checked the rear camera. The phantom white smear had slid off and left him alone. He felt a little jolt of childlike disappointment. It had been nice. The silent company, and then shook it off as if it were water from a rain just passing. A sound came then that wasn't anything in his cab. Air purging. A short, decisive psh, like a dryer cycling off. It came from behind, just far enough back to belong to another engine. Evan glanced up by instinct, knowing he would see nothing. He saw nothing. He felt the pressure of not nothing anyway, the way a room feels different when someone stands in the doorway without speaking. "Mile 24's got a sign out," the voice said, back with the same unhurried ease. "Should read merge left. Wind took it sometime this month. Merge anyway." "Copy," Evan said, and merged left at the chevrons where the message would have hung. A panel truck had stalled 100 yards ahead. Hazard lights blinking with that apologetic tempo all hazards share. In his mirror, the headlights of his tail stayed smooth and steady and unblinded, exactly the way a person would keep their lamps low when someone ahead of them needed the room. The panel driver threw a grateful hand out the window and then went back to coaxing the engine with motions that are universal and always look like prayer, whether a person believes in anything besides internal combustion or not. Past the panel, the causeway settled into its long middle. The marsh broadened, the water went to black felt. The wind laid down like it had said everything it wanted to say, and now needed to rest. Evan's hands fell into the easy rhythm that comes from many good choices in a row. He let the road sound itself out in the cabin. Fans breathed. The engine thought. The liquid behind agreed with his program and stopped arguing. The headlights behind held their place like a star following an orbit. He keyed up once, just to see if the voice felt close. "What's your handle, driver?" A beat, then a smile you could hear. "Twin," the voice said. "Short for twin sticks, shows my age. I'll take you to the split. After that, you won't need me." Evan felt the word take a seat somewhere nice and reasonable in his brain. He had learned on a 10-speed and had never had to double a clutch a fuller with a splitter unless he wanted to feel fancy. Twin sticks belonged to a different decade, to stories told by people who could draw a gear map from memory on a napkin with a pencil that had been sharpened by a knife. "Much obliged, Twin," he said. Evan rolling sugar drum. "I'll keep it tidy." "Noted," Twin said. "Mind the low dip at 29. She collects rain from nowhere." At 29 the road did, in fact, sink a half-ash. He watched the light catch better on the surface, a slick like the skin on a cup of tea if you look just right. He shifted the tanker's weight with the smallest of countermoves and felt it pass under him like a fish under the hull of a boat. The split came up sudden, and then slow, the way familiar interchanges do. Green signs making promises, a spray of lanes, then the calm because you've chosen yours. Evan took the right to stay on the causeway toward the mainland. The left peeled to the port. He tapped his horn twice, a thanks that didn't insist on being heard. "Ride safe," Twin said, voice quieting. "Watch the shadow at 32. It isn't a shadow, it's a patch. Smooth it with your eyes and the truck will believe you. After that, you're fine." "Copy," Evan said. "See you down the road, Twin." The radio didn't answer. It didn't need to. At 30U2, the road did its small trick and he did his. And the tanker agreed not to slosh and the world agreed to go on. Evan checked the mirror one last time, expecting the clean black that had become the punctuation mark of their brakes, and instead found a shape he couldn't fix with words. Not headlights, not absence. The stainless barrel had picked up a low glow that didn't come from him, an ellipse of light from nowhere following the curvature like a small moon caught in polished metal. It held for 3 breaths and then slid away like everything else in a night people would call unremarkable if they'd slept through it. At the far end of the causeway, the highway thickened. More cars, more signs that meant they were in the reach of town. Evan took the exit for fuel. The truck stop sat owlibright under canopy lights that made everything sharp and true. He pulled to a pump, shut down, and listened to his engine admire the idea of stopping. The air dryer gave its own psh, personal and familiar. He laughed quietly, then shook his head at laughing at nothing. As he was wrapping the hose, a patrol SUV rolled up parallel to the island. The trooper inside had the lean alertness of someone who had traded sleep for learning the patterns of a place. He lowered his window. "You the tanker came over the causeway just now?" he asked. Evan nodded. "Yes, sir. Appreciate your spacing with your partner," the trooper said. "We got a call about a tailgater, and then a call about a pair of rigs doing it right made it easier for us to get the pickup to settle down. Folks don't call about textbook driving much." "Nice change." Evan blinked. "My partner?" "Right behind you," the trooper said. "Good demeanor. Gave us a clean block to work with back at 21. Made the night easier." Evan glanced at his mirror out of habit, which was funny in a way he didn't have time to explain to himself. "What was he running?" he asked. "Didn't catch his company." The trooper tilted his head like a dog who hears something interesting the first time. "He was a tractor," he said. "Looked older. Marker lights along the top. Steady." My in-a-car picked up a second set of headlamps for a minute on the long shot, then they faded into yours. "Our camera's good, but these nights play tricks. Either way, thanks for the block." He lifted a hand in a small salute and idled on toward the highway. Evan finished fueling, topped off the DEF, wiped a windshield he could have called clean and made cleaner. On the side step under his driver door lay a little crescent of grease, faint and neat, the kind a thumb leaves when it checks a fifth-wheel plate and then touches something else without thinking. He looked around for a mechanic, a careless shop rag, anyone. He found only the night, honest as always. Inside, over coffee poured at 1 in the morning by a person who had the temperament for pouring coffee at 1 in the morning, he asked the cashier, "You ever get har on the causeway? That advisory station?" "Only when storms get ideas," she said. "Why?" "Had company," he said. "Good company." She smiled. "We like good company," she said, as if that had been the point all along. On the next run over the flats, the sky was clear and proud. He didn't expect a voice. He didn't ask for one. He treated the causeway with the same unshowy care he would have anyway, and it treated him back the way a road does when it notices you're trying. Somewhere around mile 15, the radio gave a single chuckle of static, the kind of sound a person might make when they see someone remember a lesson they didn't know they'd learned. He smiled into the cab at nothing, which had become something by now. Months later, sitting with other drivers at a counter where the eggs arrived fast and reasonable, he heard someone mention the causeway with a small tilt to the head. "You ever run it late and feel like you got a twin?" the man asked, half joking, half not. Evan stirred cream into his coffee and kept his eyes soft. "Sometimes a good driver shows up when you're being one," he said. "That's the deal." On his visor, tucked where fuel receipts and toll tickets live, he kept a sticky note with 3 reminders in a hand that did not write many things down. Crown the joints. Count 2. Believe the smooth. He didn't have to look at it often. He liked knowing it was there. And every once in a while, when a pickup tried a youthful move or a crosswind found a way into the trailer's thinking, an air horn rose behind him in the key of reason, and a voice that sounded like flats and marsh and old gear maps said, in its own way, "I've got your back door till the split. After that, you've got this." He always did. Story number 7. Silas liked the Mojave at night because it spoke quietly. The day made a clatter out here, heat popping in fence wire, hard light bouncing off chrome, the chatter of tourists at gas pumps, but the dark pressed everything down to a hush and left room for a person's thoughts to behave. He was dragging a light, dry van full of office paper west along the old line, the sort of load that didn't squirm or fuss if he treated it with respect. Wind rolled low across the flats and made small rivers through the stands of creosote, and the sky lifted itself clean from horizon to horizon, thin and sparkling like a hinged lid on a jewelry box. He kept the CB at a friendly murmur on 19, and the AM dial turned down to static, a habit he'd picked up years ago from an old-timer who said there were stations that only showed up when the night was empty enough to hear them. His dash threw a dim blue across the cab that was kind to the eyes. Mile markers made precise little declarations on slender posts. Every 15 miles, an old emergency call box mounted on a solar pole stood at the shoulder like a souvenir from a different decade. Most wore little hoods now, and the words "out of service" in polite lettering. They were part of the landscape the way Joshua trees were quiet, odd, ordinary once you'd learned them. He took a sip of coffee that had only a little bitterness left in it, and let the road nest into the space between his shoulders and his hands. The trailer followed like a dog who knows you're going somewhere good. A coyote ghosted across the median and paused to watch him with an expression that could have been evaluation or curiosity or both. He lifted 2 fingers off the wheel, in a hello no one would see. Just past mile 61, the AM radio stopped being nothing and became a place. A tone came first, the kind road advisories used. A single, polite up-chirp to get a brain's attention. Then a voice that sounded like paper and gauze and a good microphone said, "Traveler's information, Hollows District. Advisory follows. Eyes front." He hadn't touched the knob. The volume grew to the exact level of company in a quiet room. He adjusted nothing. The voice didn't echo. It didn't try to sell anything. It simply said, with the calm dignity of a teacher who trusted their classroom, "Wind at mile 60, 3 gusting across lanes. No closures. Night paving in the Coyote Cut. Be prepared for unexpected light." Silas half smiled. That was the precise sort of phrase a county station would use. Unexpected light. Not bright, not flashing, unexpected. He knew the Coyote Cut 2 miles carved through low rock where the road narrowed by mood rather than measurement. He hadn't heard of night paving, but he'd been off this route for a while. He reached for the dial and paused. There was no frequency to look at. The radio's display had decided to show nothing at all. He let his hand drop back to the wheel. "Eyes front," the voice said again, not scolding. It sounded like something a grandmother would murmur in a church. Pew to remind a child to read the program and not the stained glass. He looked ahead and let his grin fold back into concentration. At mile 63, a cross breeze did shove at the passenger side like a bored kid testing a refrigerator door. He leaned his shoulder into it with the lightest counter, enough to keep the lane lines obedient and tidy. The trailer gave a soft complaint somewhere in its bones and settled. No traffic nearby. The world was theirs. "Advisory," the voice went on. "Paper debris at mile 66, right lane. Eyes front. Paper debris." He glanced at the white lines, then the shoulder. A tide of discarded flyers had caught on the barrier fence and fluttered like trapped moths. A few sheets had escaped and begun their small life of drift across the asphalt. He let them cross and stay behind. The way you let feelings go that won't do you any good if you keep them. At mile 67, the voice said his name, and the inside of his chest cooled like he'd opened the refrigerator door and leaned into it. "Silas," it said, warm as a porch light. "You have water within reach. Use it. Eyes front." He blinked. He hadn't given a unit number, hadn't keyed the mic, hadn't said his own name to the radio or to the air. His given name lived on paperwork and a wallet. Out here, people called him more often by the company on his door. He reached for the bottle on the seat beside him, untouched longer than he'd meant to admit, and took a drink because thirst didn't care about mysteries. "Appreciate you," he said to the air as a joke that wasn't a joke, and the radio made a small click sound like a person's tongue touched behind the teeth. Not an answer. A punctuation. He tried the CB. "Any of y'all catching a tiss out here?" he asked. "Traveler station?" Silence for a slow 10 seconds. Then a man with a voice like a gravel road said, "You on the Hollows? Copy that sometimes. Comes through when the night's right. That the station that says eyes front a lot?" "Jericho here. 10-4, Silas said. "Eyes front." Jericho's chuckle was a low, pleasant thing. "She's been talking out there since I was a pup," he said. "Might be the same lady from way back. Might be tape. Might be something else." In the Coyote Cut, the road narrowed itself a little, and the rock came closer with the steadiness of walls that have never moved. There was no crew, no night paving, no cones. He cut his high beams to let the shadows have their dignity, and let his own amber markers pull their small chore. For a half-mile there was light he didn't make no source. A sheet laid across the rock face like a large soft breath. It wasn't brighter than his lights. It was older. It made the seams in the stone easier to read, like someone had gone in ahead of him and chalked the important parts. "Unexpected light," he said under his breath, lightly mimicking the station, and not picking at it too hard. The voice said nothing. The radio hum remembered it had been static not long ago, and offered a soft suggestion of being that again. He passed the half-dozen call boxes mounted along the shoulder inside the cut. Their little hoods blinked reflective like eyelids. One had a sticker slapped on it, weathered almost blank. The letters he could make out spelled ease, fro, in a university block font from some safety campaign. He looked away gently. He didn't need the rest of the word to do its work. Outside the cut, the land fell away to his right and shrugged up to his left, lazy shoulders of earth that learned their posture from time. The voice on the radio returned, as if it had stepped into the kitchen to check the kettle, and then had come back. "Report. Broken strap in left lane at mile 70. 1. Eyes front." He eased and scanned. There it was, half a ratchet strap lying stretched thin as a ribbon, ready to find a way under a tire. He straddled it instead, the way a body learned to do. The strap thwipped into the undercarriage and fell away. Behind him, the road swallowed whatever it had meant. In his mirror, nothing interesting happened. Good. A soft hiss rose and fell behind him the way an airdryer will sigh now and again when it likes its job. The hiss felt a hair too far back to be his. He didn't correct for it with fear, just a tuck of the chin and a breath. Jericho came back on 19. "You at 73 yet, driver?" "Coming up on it," Silas said. "Eyes front there for real," Jericho said. And the way he said real had the weight of a man whose advice had paid him back multiple times. Dip in the dark eats folks' attention. That station used to put a spike on the map for it. At 73, the road had sunk a spoon depth into itself, the asphalt shiny with some collected moisture that didn't have a source he could name. He believed it, and eased his foot as if a hand had touched his shoulder. The truck liked him for it. If the station had been guiding him, it didn't gloat. It simply shared space like a well-trained coworker. "Advisory," the voice said. "Lane closure westbound at mile 79. Single file when directed. Eyes front." He felt his neck heat with a small embarrassment, because he'd begun to listen for pattern. There weren't many closures out here at this hour, unless a crew had a reason to avoid the Sunday. He trusted the voice anyway because trust had gotten him home more nights than paranoia had. At 79, an aero board winked its leftward chevrons, and a single pickup with a flashing amber light sat watched over by a man in a reflective jacket nursing a thermos. 2 cones closed the right lane for 10 feet where a patch had been cut in a neat square and filled in with a darker slab. The man lifted his palm. Silas lifted his back. They made a tiny human transaction that put their names nowhere and still meant plenty. At mile 82, he nearly said, "Eyes front," out loud with the radio, and caught himself, shy at the idea of singing along with the station. He breathed out and checked his gauges. The world hung together. Then the radio shifted. The advisory cadence slid away, and in its place came a sequence of numbers spoken with the careful diction of a person who counts not for show, but for certainty. It sounded like a ship calling out depths. 8, 3, 8, 2, 8, 1, 8, 7. Soft pause. Silas, eyes front. He felt the hairs at the back of his neck speak to each other like a murmuring crowd. Ahead, a vehicle sat on the shoulder with hazard snapping. He had seen it already in the way human eyes see such things long before the rest of a person catches up. The hazard blink rate was a little irregular, as if something in the car didn't enjoy being asked to be regular. He looked to his left lane clear, and slid over with the sort of care that comes from practicing kindness until it looks like instinct. As he passed, the driver, a woman wrapped in the posture of someone trying not to be a problem, looked up and tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. He gave her the ABS light switch twice, an old trick for a tiny encouragement, then shifted back to his lane when his trailer cleared. "Good," the radio said pleasantly. Just that one word, the way someone says it on a baseball field after a throw meets a glove clean. Silas took the next exit for a small fuel and a stretch, more because he'd learned that breaking the spell of a story at your choosing is better than waiting for the story to find its own end. The travel plaza at Hollow Ridge was a low loop of light, and a line of pumps country-lined with pickup trucks. Inside, coffee lived under warmers behind clean glass. The cashier had a face that knew more about sunrises than Netflix. A corkboard beside the restroom doors held flyers for yard sales. A lost parrot from last summer, a livestock auction that had a design that looked like a fair poster from the 1980 seconds. He took his cup out to the edge of the lot. The air had that metal note the desert sometimes takes on at night, like something invisible had been sharpened. The old call box at the ramp to the highway clicked at its solar panel, an insect noise of electricity figuring out its business. He walked past it with a sort of reverence he hadn't planned, glanced at its hood. The sticker he'd half read in the cut earlier lived in full here, printed under laminate that had just barely lost its shine. Ease front to strict safety counsel. Do not drive distracted. Below, in handwriting tidy as a schoolteacher's, in memory of A. Ward. He touched the edge of the sticker with a finger because it felt like a polite thing to do, like touching a turnstile as you pass through a station for the first time in years. The radio in his cab, volume low but not off, breathed a single syllable too quiet to parse and then became a comfortable silence again. Jericho's voice came back on 19, closer now, the kind of strength you get when somebody is in the same part of the sky as you. You hit Hollow Ridge? Standing in it, Silas said. Old call boxes sound like crickets out there when the heat changes. Jericho said, gentle. I grew up with a mama who stopped at those more times than not. No cell service back then. That station you've got? People used to call it the hollow frequency, like it was a haunted house. It's just the desert reusing voices that were kind the first time. Silas sipped and watched a trucker in a sweatshirt at the far end of the lot coax a stubborn vending machine with patience. How long's it been on? Officially, Jericho said. 'Tis on 5:30 a.m., traveler information, a couple decades. Then Budget trimmed it to a tape that ran winter of 2000, whatever, and then they forgot. Unofficially, he added, and Silas could hear the shrug. You'll hear it when the road wants you to hear it. If it starts using your name and telling you to turn your lights off to see the stars, you tell it no thank you and keep on. That's not its voice. Copy, Silas said, smiling. It didn't feel like a ghost story. It felt like a safety meeting that had kept on meeting when nobody scheduled it. He headed back toward his cab, ghosted past the call box, and put a knuckle on the hood like a hat tip. Back on the highway, the voice returned as if it had been sitting with its hands folded, patient. Report, it said. Wild burros grazing near mile 90 median. Eyes front. If you drive the desert, you learn the difference between feral donkeys and roadside rumor. He scanned. Two shapes in the dim, small gray, surprised to have been made important by the mention. He gave them a lane and a little space like you. Give opinions you don't share but can't change. The next 5 miles, the radio told him nothing he could argue with. He began to think of it as a second set of eyes that didn't get tired. And then checked the thought because machines don't love you back. At mile 95, the number station portion returned, more quietly, like a person muttering to help themselves think. 96, it said. 95, 94. In between, the voice hummed. A tune lawyers use to soothe their nerves in elevators. It made him want to hum. He didn't. He let the tires find their tiny clicks and let his focus sit like a coin on a table, perfectly still. Any tremor showing up if he got sloppy. Past the state line, a set of radio towers stood on a low hill, red lamps making their patient blink. As he drew even, the advisory station blurred with a sports broadcast, a weather update, a Spanish pop song all braided together, then came clear again. Eyes front, it said, cheerful, as if to apologize for other people's noise. There was one place out here that had been called dangerous since wagons goat draw, a shallow S-curve between black basalt humps. It wasn't scary. It was rude in underhanded ways, hiding small changes from folks who wanted to pull their phone out and check a ping. The advisory voice went quiet for those 2 miles, as if it too believed in giving respectful silence to a place that had earned it. At the far end, it said, good. Just once, like a test had been administered to a student who didn't know they were being tested and had still gotten every answer right. At the next fuel stop, a state trooper had parked sideways beside a construction trailer to write without glare. Silas set his brake, hopped out to stretch, and nodded hello. The trooper nodded back, took in the truck in one sweep, and, with curiosity instead of authority, asked, "You get the hollows tonight?" "On 5:30 without turning the knob," Silas said. The trooper looked pleased in a way that meant nothing needed a citation. "Used to volunteer reading those advisories before I made this my work," she said. A Ward was my neighbor growing up. She'd sit with a reel-to-reel in her garage and read road notes. The engineer faxed her on a machine that weighed more than a microwave. When she got sick, the district kept her voice on the loop because people stopped doing dumb things when she said eyes front. We'd take calls on the call boxes back when they worked, and folks would say thank you to the voice like it could hear them. Silas peered at the little tower on the trailer. A shoebox-sized transmitter sat under a sheet of plexiglass, all proper. "She still has good timing," he said. "Sometimes I swear I hear her when I'm out past 2, the trooper said, not embarrassed. "If I do, I drink a little water, stop at the next turnout, count my breaths, and then go on with better manners." She tipped her hat 2 degrees. "Safe travels." He rolled on. The advisory voice didn't return for a dozen miles, and when it did, it sounded like a different day briefly. "Road closed ahead at mile 112 due to rockslide," it announced. Crisp. His gut squeezed small in reflex. He scanned the horizon. There was nothing like a closure. No flares, no cruisers, no beacons of any color. The timestamp a proper station would have included wasn't spoken. The voice proceeded into a list of detours that didn't exist anymore. A minute later, as if noticing itself, it corrected. "No closure," it said. "Advisory outdated. Eyes front." He let out a breath he hadn't told himself he'd been holding. Jericho came on, companionable. She does that sometimes, plays last season's problem. When she remembers, she says sorry like you just heard. When she doesn't, you treat it like an old song on the jukebox smile, but don't order another. "Copy," Silas said, and watched the rock cuts glide by with their evening faces on, handsome and stern. Past 1 in the morning. When even the desert that prides itself on not sleeping at all decides to lower its chin to its chest for an hour, the radio did something he wouldn't have described to anyone who didn't already understand it. It went from words to a tone that wasn't a tone, more like a shape of quiet. He felt his eyelids go heavy, the way they do when an engine hum and the road's precise sameness pair up in a lullaby. The not tone changed 1 hair higher, and the urge to blink away the whole night eased. He got the sense of being watched by something that knew enough about people to nudge them to choose well without making them feel pushed. He put his next rest stop on the horizon like a decision made hours ago, and let his breathing match the rhythm of tires over joints. The hollows didn't talk much after that. It picked good moments. "Dust Devil on the right at mile 128, it said, and he saw the small spinning column of dirt and tiny plant bones march across the shoulder like a very serious child on their way to accomplish something. "Stray tire and median at 133, it added, and there it was, a full wheel and rim sitting weirdly proud in the scrub, a token from somebody else's lesson. "Junction ahead. Eyes front." And he took it. He left the transmitters behind, and the desert fluffed up slightly as if to say, "See you next time." On an impulse that felt more like courtesy than curiosity, he exited at a dot on the map called Ward Springs, a place with a weather-beaten cafe and a single pump under a shelter built for shade more than rain. A photo nailed to the wall inside near the pie case caught his eye. It showed a woman in a button-down shirt sitting at a folding table with a microphone on a stand and a cup of tea to her right. Sun spearing a garage door open behind her. On the wall, someone had hung a hand-painted sign with block letters that read "Ease Front." Beneath the photo, in the small, neat letters he remembered from the call box, A.A. Ward, Travelers Information Volunteer, 1,997, 2011. A second line in different handwriting said, "Thanks for the company." He didn't make a ceremony out of it. He paid for his coffee and a piece of something with peaches, chatted with the cashier about a storm that might or might not happen next week, then went back to his cab with the feeling that he had been introduced to someone who had no interest in being a ghost, and every interest in being useful. On future runs, the hollows turned up some nights and not others. He didn't go looking. He left the AM knob alone and let the quiet be itself. When the voice came, he treated it like a colleague who stuck their head in the door to mention a detail he would be happier not to miss. When it didn't, he carried the advice in his own head and said eyes front to himself in moments when a phone buzzed or a thought wanted to wander off. He never heard it ask for foolish things. Once a whisper, not even a word. Just the idea of one seemed to suggest he coast the dark stretch with lights off to see stars. He shut the thought out like you shut a screen door on a night moth and kept rolling with his reason intact. The station didn't sulk. It went back to burros and blown dust, and occasional thank yous for taking a promised detour. Once late, he keyed up to Jericho as they passed each other in opposite directions. Their headlights a brief handshake. "You ever talk back to her?" he asked. "Only in my head," Jericho said. "I tell her I'm listening. I tell her thank you. I tell her I'll pass it on to the rookie who wants to stare at the moon instead of the lane. That's the deal. Someone kept me between the lines. I do it for the next one." Silas didn't add much to that. He didn't brand it with anything other than decency. On the underside of his visor, where a person sometimes tucks a photograph or a receipt, he stuck a little square of paper with a word he cut out of a free brochure at a rest area. Ease. Under that, in his own hand, front. If he ever gave the truck back, he'd peel it off. Or maybe he wouldn't. And it would find the next set of hands and do the small job a tiny sign can do. The desert was itself either way. Some nights it offered old guidance over a frequency that pretended to be lost. Some nights it offered coyotes with opinions and stars like salt, and a wind that kept its voice down. He drove through it with the quiet gratitude of a guest who knows how to behave in someone else's house. And when a call box clicked as the temperature slid, and a voice asked if he would please look ahead and keep it clean through the next mile, he did exactly that. It made the road better. It made him better. That was all anyone had asked for when they decided to put voices on the air. Story number 8. Noah ran line haul nights, the kind of runs where the world made long, unbroken thoughts. He had a double drop deck under him, empty tonight. Steel ribs shining where straps usually Saturday. The route cut toward a river. Most people forgot until they had to cross it. The main bridge was under repair. The daytime detour, adding an hour and a half of county roads and patience. Dispatch had said, "You'll hit it after midnight. Take the ferry. County's got a tug that runs late for commercial." He'd never put a tractor trailer on a ferry before. He pictured a barge and a little pushboat with its light like a coin floating on black water. He pictured a deckhand in a knit cap and a jacket with reflective tape that had learned salt. The approach road narrowed into cottonwoods and old flood signs. His GPS lost confidence and showed a pale blue ribbon that stopped 100 yards shy of the water, as if river and software had agreed to disagree. A hand-painted board announced Ferry One-Way Night Sound Horn. The paint had cracked in the way paint cracks when it's taken sun and cold for a decade, and still wants to be useful. He rolled down his window. The night smelled like creosote pilings and wet iron and something sweet from upstream he couldn't name. He put 2 polite taps on the air horn, not enough to wake anyone who didn't need waking, enough to make a statement. Across the river, a light answered with 2 small blinks. They didn't look electric. They looked like someone had shaded and unshaded a lantern. Noah eased forward to the edge where a ramp sloped into the black. Chains clinked somewhere. A low thrum began, not his engine, not a truck, a different kind of mechanical breath. The ferry appeared as a shape before it became a boat. A rectangle of deck edged with a low rail, tires hung along its sides for bumpers, a little tower at one end with windows facing both directions. It came without visible wake until it was close enough for him to see the push of water at its bow. A woman stood at the rail with a pole held easily in one hand, the way a person holds something they've used so often it feels like an extension of their wrist. Her jacket had a county patch, faded to a soft blue-gray. The reflective tape caught his headlamps and drew a rectangle around her shoulders. She lifted her hand. He lifted his. The deck came to the concrete with a soft clap of wood on ramp. Chains rattled, hooks dropped into cleats with practice sounds. The woman pointed, 2 fingers together, to tell him where she wanted his front axle when he came aboard. He understood it as if he'd been taught in another life. "Engines low," a small speaker on the tower said, the sound thin as a vinyl record and as calm. "Lights to markers, 1 at a time. Hold on the dots." The dots were painted on the ferry deck, big white circles, 2 for cars, 1 larger for something like him. He rolled on at idle, watched her hand, watched the dots, watched the water try to pretend it wasn't water under all that steel. The ferry gave a small answering flex under his tires. It didn't feel like floating, not yet. It felt like a different kind of pavement. When his steer tires kissed the big dot, he set his brake and cut his headlights to markers as asked. The world went soft. The woman stepped to his cab and lifted her chin toward his window. He rolled it the rest of the way down. Up close, her jacket patch offered a name that had been washed so often it had turned into the idea of letters. M. Reyes. The bill of her cap had a frayed edge that had done its time in Sunday. "You're good," she said with a sure person's patience. "Don't leave your seat. Tug's got a mind when the current pinches. We'll put you across gentle. First time," he said, a little embarrassed to admit it. "Night is kinder," she said, and tapped the bald palm of her glove lightly against his mirror bracket, a small hello. She walked the length of his trailer, glanced at his lights, his plates, the deck like she was counting something no one taught in schools. Another vehicle rolled on behind him, a box truck without markings. Its driver cut his lights without being told. The cabin stayed dark. Noah expected a silhouette to move. It didn't. The ferry pulled away with a motion so smooth, his eyes believed it before the rest of him did. Ropes came in, the thrum deepened. The current took them and tried to draw its own lines on where they ought to go. The tower's little speaker said nothing for a minute and then, as if remembering a script it liked, offered, "Remain in vehicles. No smoking. No stepping to rail." Noah watched the black water. The surface didn't show shapes, it showed moods. It held small papers and leaves and old things, moving a layer down where the light didn't reach. A bell buoy upstream gave one patient note every few seconds, a metronome set in a past he didn't share. The ferry crossed an invisible seam, and the air cooled on his face. Halfway across, a low fog slid out of nowhere and put a veil between his side and the far shore. He could still see lights where he expected them, but not as points more as suggestions, smeared and generous. The box truck behind him shifted on its suspension with a little creak, as if something inside had leaned. He glanced in the mirror. No movement in the cab. No glow from a phone. Just his own marker lights reflected back at him twice, once in the water, once in the box truck's polished bumper. A thunk came then, near the passenger rear of his tractor. Like a palm tap, polite. He checked his gauges out of old habit. Everything sat where it should. He looked at Reyes. She had turned her head toward the same sound, not surprised, not alarmed. She raised 2 fingers and made a small circle in the air, the universal sign beyond words. For, keep your wheels true. He nodded, even though she wasn't looking. He could feel the tug adjust, the ferry lean into a curve you couldn't see. The tower speaker breathed and clicked, as if waking to give the one message it had been built for. "No stepping to rail," it said again. Tender this time. "Stay in your seat. Look ahead." He did. The fog thickened for a moment, and then lifted its shoulder enough to let him see a dark shape sliding under them, long and narrow, speed matched. A second ferry? A barge? The rational possibilities arranged themselves and waited to be chosen. It didn't make sense for traffic to pass under. It didn't make sense to see anything besides water. He blinked and the shape resolved into a band of brighter black, a seam of current that insisted on pretending to be a thing. He told his mind to let the river be a river and not a trick. A chain rasped on deck. Reyes was moving again, crossing his field of view. Her boots made prints on wet steel that held for a time longer than water should let them. She walked to the box truck and leaned to peer into its windshield the way a person does when they're giving someone inside a chance to wave back. Her hand lifted. No wave from the cab. No one noticed, without meaning to, that the fog curved around her when she stood still, as if it had learned her outline and decided not to bother it. The ferry nudged the far ramp with the soft authority of something that had done that exact motion 10 times a day for years. Chains went out. Hooks caught. The deck pitched a hair and settled. The speaker offered a small, satisfied click. "Tractor first," it said. "Ease off slow. Follow the post to the right. Toll box will assume coins. If it does not, proceed." Reyes stood by his mirror again as he brought his engine back up, as if she wanted to hear its first sentence. "You're clear," she said. "Keep the center of the lane. Don't look at the river when you climb. It likes to be looked at. Don't give it that." He believed her in the uncomplicated way a person can believe, a stranger who sounds like a teacher in a classroom you want to pass. He lowered his window farther. "Thanks," he said. She tipped the bill of her cap. "Night is kinder," she said again, like a promise she kept to herself. He eased onto the ramp. Tires kissed wet concrete, then dry. The road off the landing rose in a modest S. Posts with reflectors lined the first 100 feet. Close together, a spine to follow. He kept his eyes between them, let his hands follow their language. At the top, a small booth sat with a brass-faced coin box attached. Its sign in block print. Night toll, $2. He fished coins. The slot accepted them with a click, then let them slide right back into the return with the faintest ring, like dropping a quarter on a countertop. He tried again, because stubbornness is a cousin of respect. Same result. Inside the booth, a light burned behind frosted glass. No shadow moved. The little speaker under the coins made a sound that might have been a thank you, or might have been a sigh of old wires. He took back his coins, because the world had made a decision, and he didn't see the point in arguing with it. He rolled up the grade, and let the landing fall behind. In his side mirror, the ferry already looked farther than it should. The box truck eased off and climbed the ramp after him without revealing a driver. He waited for the shape of a head, a hand on a wheel, any proof of a person. The fog swallowed that hunch, and offered him his own lights to look at instead. 2 miles on, at a diner sleepily lit near a grain silo, he pulled in for coffee he didn't need, and a story he wasn't sure he'd tell. The counter had a glass case with pies under domes, and a jar of toothpicks like a museum exhibit. The woman at the register wore a sweater with a stitched name worked into the chest. Luz. She put out a cup for him without asking. The coffee tasted like the inside of the night, which is to say, "Fine. You run the ferry at night?" he asked, like a person asks about the weather. "When they call it," she said, non-committal. "Storms, work runs, sometimes a barge needing a hand, and county tries to be neighborly." "You caught it late?" "Caught it now," he said. "Lady in a county cap." Reyes. He said the name softly, because names deserve soft. Luz's brows lifted in a way that had happiness in it, and something else. "May," she said. "May could put a rig on a bar of soap and bring it across." "You thank her?" "I tried," he said with a smile. "Do it again," Luz said, and pointed with her chin to the bulletin board by the door. A metal plaque hung there. Cheap aluminum made dignified by the way it had been kept clean. It read, "May Rees, River Ferry Crew, for night crossings made kinder." Beneath that, 2008, 2019. A photograph tucked into the frame showed May in the jacket he had just seen, cap pulled low, a rope in her hand, fog behind her making a halo for someone who would have hated that word. Noah let the coffee sit warm in his hands and thought about nights that collect themselves into a pocket of memory and refuse to be emptied with the rest of the change. He went back outside and checked his tires like someone had asked him to without asking. On the sidewall of the steer tire on the passenger side, a faint streak of tar lay like a fingerprint, a little crescent where something had touched it and left a mark older than the rubber itself. He rubbed it with a thumb, and it made his gloves smell like fondness and docks. Down the road, the river fell back into being a line on a map. The highway ran easy. He listened for a radio voice that might explain more than the world wanted explained. Nothing came but the engine and the casual lunchroom talk of the CB, a couple of drivers appreciating the fact that the wind had decided not to get involved tonight. He drove his miles and made his drop and slept later in an industrial lot that pretended to be a motel. Days afterward, routing took him past the river again in daylight. Curiosity is a muscle. Used well, it stays helpful. He swung down to the landing far side, the one he'd climbed from. Most ferries look smaller in the Sunday, this one did too. The posts with reflectors stood ordinary. The coin box had a hand-lettered sign on it now. Night Toll waved thank you for working. The booth door sat open. Inside, a fan turned without air. A newspaper from 2 weeks ago lay folded to the weather page. He walked to the water's edge, far enough to smell mud, but not far enough to get involved. The ferry sat cabled to its home. No one stood at the rail. A rope coiled itself like a cat at the base of a cleat, neat without fuss. He looked for scuffs shaped like his, for boot prints holding some echo of a night's work. The concrete is bad at memory unless a person insists. It held nothing he could swear to. He slipped a coin in the slot anyway, left his hand there to feel it decide what to do. It fell. This time it stayed gone. On his way back to the truck, a county pickup pulled in. The driver, a man with a sun scowl and a coffee he'd rationed, nodded at Noah like men nod at each other when they've chosen a life that rewards steadiness. "You need a crossing?" the man asked. "No," Noah said. "I owe one." The man looked past him to the coin box and the river, doing the math most folks don't do out loud. "You catch May?" he asked. "Felt like it," Noah said. The man tucked his chin the way a person does when they're agreeing with a truth you don't have to say. "She made rules we keep without writing them down," he said. "Don't walk to the rail. Don't stare at the water when you're climbing. Keep the lane even when the river thinks it's your job to zig. Night's kinder if you let it be." We try to keep it that way for her. Noah climbed back up, sat with the wheel, and listened to the city in miniature under his seat, the fans, a relay clicking softly as it decided to be content. He took the grade up from the landing with his eyes where they needed to be. He didn't look in the mirror until the S was done. When he did, the water was just water. The ferry a rectangle with no story attached to it that day. The posts doing their daylight duty without romance. That night, somewhere far from rivers, cutting through wheat and stubble in the kind darkness between towns, he heard a small thunk at his passenger rear, polite as a person clearing their throat to speak. He checked his mirrors, kept his hands light, and did not step to any rail, real or imagined. His rig stayed true. The world let him pass. On he went with the quiet knowledge that some places keep a lantern lit in rules and habits instead of flames and glass, and that if you follow those, you can carry the light without ever having to hold it. And now the road grows still. The engines rest, the stories fade, and only the hum of the road. Night remains. These 8 tales drift like echoes in the dark, soft reminders of what lingers beyond the reach of the headlights. Thank you for staying until the very end. If you're new, subscribe to our channel so you never miss what waits out there in the quiet. And like our video. Your like motivates us to keep bringing you more nights on the road. Now, let the silence take over, breathe slow, and drift into sleep. Good night.